Chapter 453. Dong Wushang didn't say anything. He didn't show any special reaction to Chu Yang blocking the saber for him. But his heart was still trembling and burning. Dong Wushang's character was different from Chu Yang's. He was somewhat similar to Gu Duxing's. Chu Yang's character was that he would definitely do what he said. He was a man of his word. He would definitely say it after he did it. Chu Yang would never bury any of his achievements. In his previous life, he had seen many people who were too embarrassed to say what they had done, and were misunderstood. He had also seen many people who only knew how to do things but didn't say it. So, Chu Yang realized the principle. If you don't say it, how would others know what you did? If you did it but didn't say it, how would others give you recognition? This was a world of competition. And it was a competition of life and death. He couldn't do anything stupid. After walking for several hundred feet, Chu Yang circulated his martial energy to activate the medicinal efficacy. He rubbed his hand gently. The wound had already scabbed. Although there was still some pain, it was no longer a big problem. This fact made Dong Wushang widen his eyes. Chu Yang smiled and patted his shoulder with his palm. He blinked and said, "Don't worry, I have elixirs. I'm not afraid of injuries." He blinked again and said, "So you don't have to be afraid either." Dong Wushang widened his eyes and suddenly laughed heartily. This time, his mood was completely relaxed. Chu Yang also laughed happily. He scolded jokingly, "Damn it, a saint-level sparring partner. I've really profited this time. If that guy knew that I would recover so quickly, he would be depressed to death." Dong Wushang laughed so hard that he was out of breath. He said, "Yes. Yes. Ha ha." He laughed and laughed. Then, he suddenly paused and said, "But whether it's a sparring partner or no matter what, I'll get my revenge from Elder Yu sooner or later." Dong Wushang's voice became low and deep. "Originally, my martial arts wish was to become a saber emperor. I didn't even think about becoming a saber monarch. But after meeting you, my goal changed to saber monarch. But now I only have one goal, and that is to defeat Elder Yu and get my revenge. I'll never forget this saber strike." Dong Wushang looked into the void and said deeply. Chu Yang smiled and didn't say anything. It seemed that defeating Elder Yu would become Dong Wushang's long-term goal. Having such a goal was a blessing. He pondered and said, "Just a moment ago, we were still chatting and laughing freely, drinking at the same table. The next moment, we were already facing each other in a life-and-death battle, with cold blades and cold blades. Without friendship, without feelings, without benefits, with only personal joy and anger, with only a moment of inspiration, you can kill. And he killed someone who could barely be considered a friend." He sighed softly. "Wu Shang, Duke Yu has given me an incomparably profound lesson. That's 3 days of Jianghu, boss." Dong Wushang stepped on the thick pine needles, making rustling sounds. He said in a deep voice, "The upper 3 heavens and the lower 3 heavens are 2 completely different planes. Boss, we have to be clear about this. If there comes a day when our brothers are no longer by your side, you must never, ever, ever be soft-hearted." Chu Yang nodded silently. "Don't let him reveal Duke Yu's strength," Chu Yang warned. "I know." Dong Wushang's heart was heavy. When he saw Duke Yu's earth-shattering saber, Dong Wushang felt his own insignificance from the bottom of his heart. That kind of feeling of death directly shrouded his heart, made Dong Wushang's heart tremble. "From now on, I don't want to feel that kind of feeling again." Looking at Chu Yang's blood-stained hand, Dong Wushang's heart throbbed again. "From now on, I won't let my brothers bleed for me. I don't want to feel that kind of heartache again. This requires strength." Dong Wushang didn't speak again, but his eyes became deep. A firm belief quietly rose from his heart. Perhaps even Chu Yang didn't know that Duke Yu's saber had changed Dong Wushang's life's belief and pursuit. From now on, he would only pursue the peak. When he returned to the camp, he saw GMO and Luo Kudi wrestling with each other with bruises all over their faces. Dong Wushang had just experienced a life-and-death crisis. Seeing these two so mischievous at this time, he couldn't help but feel displeased. He stepped forward and kicked each of them, sending them flying. He roared, "What are you messing around for? Very interesting, isn't it? Idle? Stand up. Master Dong will spar with you too. Motherfucker. You're crazy." GMO turned over and jumped up. "I'm your third brother." "Third brother?" Dong Wushang chuckled mischievously. He took down the dark saber that weighed 570 pounds from his shoulder, and held it in his hand. Then, he said, "Since that's the case, I will accompany third brother to exchange pointers. Third brother, please advise me." Jimo's face fell immediately. Dong Wushang didn't say anything else. He shouted and pulled out his saber. A mass of saber light enveloped the two of them. GMO and Luo Kudi turned pale with fright at the same time. They reacted quickly and formed an alliance to fight against Dong Wushang. A moment ago, they were still fighting to the death. Now they were fighting side by side. The thickness of these two's skin made Chu Yang feel ashamed of his inferiority. Chu Yang shook his head and laughed. Suddenly, a sharp sword intent came from afar. The person hadn't arrived yet, but that kind of awe-inspiring aura had already made people feel cold all over. A faint voice said, "Why are you fighting?" "Ah? Boss." The awe-inspiring sword intent suddenly turned into a spring breeze. A thin figure suddenly appeared. Gu Du-shing! As soon as he saw Chu Yang, Gu Du-shing rushed over in surprise. Chu Yang immediately turned around and greeted him with a smile. Both of them were inexplicably happy to see each other. Chu Yang sensitively saw that Gu Du-shing's face was somewhat pale. Obviously, he was seriously injured and hadn't recovered yet. "Open your mouth," Chu Yang said. Gu Du-shing didn't have time to speak. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, a pill was suddenly stuffed into his mouth by Chu Yang. In an instant, a pure spiritual power surged from his dantian. His whole body felt so comfortable that he wanted to moan. "Quickly cultivate!" Chu Yang patted his shoulder. Gu Du-shing knew that this was a rare elixir. He didn't dare to neglect it. He immediately sat down cross-legged and started to cultivate. After an hour, the five brothers sat together. Gu Du-shing's injury had actually completely recovered. "Du-shing, although your injury has recovered, don't expose it for these 2 days. At the critical moment, strike," Chu Yang said. "I know. Then I'll pretend to be a patient for these 2 days. This is easy." Gu Du-shing and Chu Yang had not seen each other for a long time. He was excited and spoke more. His voice was cheerful. As he spoke, he started to cultivate. His face immediately turned pale and yellow, as if he was seriously injured. He said, "Is this okay?" Luo Kudi and GMO burst out laughing at the same time. "Old Gu is really something." Gu Du-shing knocked each of them on the head. "Motherfucker! If you call me Old Gu again, I'll cut you up." Everyone laughed together. "There are still 2 days. In these 2 days, I'll give you a special training," Chu Yang said slowly. "This is related to GMO's marriage. You can't be careless. Since GMO has taken a fancy to this daughter-in-law, we not only have to fight for her, we have to win beautifully. Fair and square. We can't allow any imperfections in our marriage." Chu Yang paused and said, "We can't rely on others. We brothers must do our best. Understand?" "Yes." Gu Du-shing, Dong Wushang, and Luo Kudi agreed at the same time. Jimo's heart warmed. His eyes turned red. His lips trembled a few times. He resisted the excitement in his heart and said with a smile, "Good. When I get my daughter-in-law, I'll get all of you drunk. Ha ha." His voice trembled as he laughed. But the 4 of them didn't laugh at him. Gu Du-shing and Dong Wushang, who were famous for their cold faces, gently stretched out their hands and patted Jimo's shoulder. "Brother, you know, we also know. After this, Heavenly Armament Pavilion will open in 3 days." Chu Yang smiled and said, "And this time Ao, Xiao, and Mo clans will provide us with a lot of money. Especially Mo Tianyun. He will provide the biggest help to our heavenly armament pavilion! Ha ha ha! Everyone laughed. They were overjoyed. Thinking of Mo Tianyun's miserable appearance of losing his family fortune, these heartless guys laughed even harder. One day later, the sound of galloping cavalry rumbled outside the mountain. Looking down from the top of the mountain, one could see an extremely elite cavalry team roaring from afar like a black dragon. Every single one of them was a rare and precious horse that was hard to find. Every rider on the horse was a 1 in 10,000 expert. They were as majestic as pine trees. Their statures were tall and straight. The horses were like dragons. They were galloping horizontally and vertically. Their aura could swallow rivers and mountains. A big flag was fluttering in the wind. The flag was black. A clump of golden bamboos stood proudly in the dark. It was fluttering in the biting cold wind of Mt Dingjun. The aura of a sovereign overlooking the world spread out in a rampant and arrogant manner. Cheers erupted from different directions on Mt Dingjun. They went straight to the sea of clouds. Countless flags of the dark bamboo were erected in succession. One could see that the entire mountain was densely covered with flags of the dark bamboo. This momentum was truly heaven-shaking and earth-shattering, and it was extremely vast. The stream of black iron rushed into Mt Dingjun. It seemed as if they had turned a blind eye to the thunderous cheers on the mountain. Jun Shizhu has arrived! Gu Duxing stood beside Chuyang. He was looking at the cavalry team rushing into Mt Dingjun without any scruples. They were rushing all the way up. His eyes were emitting a fervent luster. Such power, such might, and such aura could swallow rivers and mountains. Such a sovereign overlooking the world should have belonged to a man. But it belonged to a woman now. The cavalry of the dark bamboo had already rushed into Mt Dingjun. A long trail of smoke and dust was rushing straight into the sky from the main road behind them. It's no wonder that they can unify the underworld forces of the three heavens, Chu Yang praised from the bottom of his heart. The black cavalry team rushed onto this platform after a long time. They appeared on the platform with a rumbling sound. Then, they reined in their horses at the same time. The strong horses neighed and stood up. Then, they stopped at the same time. The riders dismounted from their horses and stood straight beside their war horses. A graceful figure dressed in black slowly got down from the carriage and stood there. Her stature wasn't tall. In fact, she looked even shorter than a man. But she took a few steps forward. And an aura of disdain spread out from her body. This invisible power swept across Mt Dingjun in a flash. At this moment, all the people in the mountains and plains were completely silent. This black figure slowly raised her head and insipidly said, "Everyone has been waiting for a long time." Her voice wasn't loud, but it spread throughout the entire Mt Dingjun. There was no reply. Then she swept her eyes around and looked at the surrounding mountains. Suddenly, the entire mountain range felt as cold as the severe winter. The Lord of the Dark Bamboo, the leader of the underworld forces of the three heavens, Jun Shizhu. She had arrived. Chapter 454. Dong Wushang didn't say anything. He didn't have any special reaction to Chu Yang blocking the saber for him. But his heart was still trembling and burning. Dong Wushang's character was different from Chu Yang's. He was somewhat similar to Gu Duxing. Chu Yang's character was that he would definitely do what he said. He was a man of his word. He would definitely say it after he did it. Chu Yang would never bury any of his achievements. In his previous life, he had seen many people who were too embarrassed to say what they had done and were misunderstood. He had seen many people who only knew how to do things but didn't say it. Therefore, Chu Yang understood a principle: if you don't say it, how would others know what you did? If you did it but didn't say it, how would others give you recognition? This was a world of competition. And it was a competition of life and death. He couldn't be stupid. After walking for several hundred feet, Chu Yang circulated his martial energy to activate the medicinal efficacy. He rubbed his hand gently. The wound had already scabbed. Although there was still some pain, it was no longer a big problem. This fact made Dong Wushang widen his eyes. Chu Yang smiled and patted his shoulder with his palm. He blinked and said, "Don't worry, I have elixirs. I'm not afraid of injuries." He blinked again and said, "So you guys shouldn't be afraid either." Dong Wushang widened his eyes. Suddenly, he felt relieved and laughed loudly. This time, his mood was completely relaxed. Chu Yang also laughed happily. He scolded jokingly, "Damn, a saint-level sparring partner. I've really made a fortune this time. If that guy knew that I would recover so quickly, he would be depressed to death." Dong Wushang laughed so hard that he was out of breath. He said, "No anchor. Not bad. Ha ha." He laughed and laughed. Then, he suddenly paused and said, "But whether it's a sparring partner or no matter what, I'll get my revenge from Elder Yu sooner or later." Dong Wushang's voice became low and deep. "Originally, my martial arts wish was to become a saber emperor. I didn't even think about becoming a saber monarch. But after meeting you, my goal changed to become a saber monarch. But now I only have one goal, and that is to defeat Elder Yu and get my revenge. I will never forget this slash." Dong Wushang's eyes were fixed on the beast spoon as he looked into the void, and said solemnly. Chu Yang smiled and didn't say anything. From the looks of it, defeating Duke Yu would probably become Dong Wushang's long-term goal. Having such a goal was a blessing. He pondered and said, "A moment ago, we were still talking and laughing freely, drinking at the same table. The next moment, we were already facing life and death, with cold blades and cold blades. Without friendship, without feelings, without benefits, just based on one's own emotions, just a whim, you can kill." And he killed someone who could barely be considered a friend. He sighed softly. "Wu Shang, Duke Yu has taught me an incomparably profound lesson, O heir. That's 3 days of Jianghu, boss." Dong Wushang stepped on the thick pine needles, making rustling sounds. He said in a deep voice, "Lower 3 heavens and upper 3 heavens are 2 completely different planes. Boss, we have to be clear about this. If there comes a day when our brothers are no longer by your side, you must never, ever, ever be soft-hearted." Chu Yang nodded silently. "Don't let Duke Yu reveal his strength." Chu Yang exhorted. "I know." Dong Wushang's heart was heavy. Seeing Duke Yu's earth-shattering saber, Dong Wushang felt his own insignificance from the bottom of his heart. That kind of feeling of death that shrouded his heart made Dong Wushang's heart tremble. "From now on, I don't want to feel that kind of feeling again." Looking at Chu Yang's blood-stained hand, Dong Wushang's heart throbbed again. "From now on, I won't let my brothers bleed for me. I don't want to feel that kind of heartache again. This requires strength." Dong Wushang didn't speak again, but his eyes became deep. A firm belief quietly rose from his heart. Perhaps even Chu Yang didn't know that Duke Yu's saber had changed Dong Wushang's lifelong belief and pursuit. From now on, he would only pursue the peak. When he returned to the camp, he saw GMO and Luo Kudi wrestling with each other with bruises all over their faces. Dong Wushang had just experienced a life-and-death crisis. Seeing these two so mischievous at this time, he couldn't help but feel displeased. He stepped forward and gave each of them a kick, sending them flying. He roared, "What are you messing around for? Interesting, isn't it? Idle? Stand up. Master Dong will spar with you too. Damn it. You're crazy." GMO turned over and jumped up. "I'm your third brother." "Third brother?" Dong Wushang chuckled mischievously. He took down the dark saber that weighed 570 kilograms from his shoulder, and held it in his hand. He said, "Since that's the case, I'll accompany third brother to exchange pointers." Jimo's face fell immediately. Dong Wushang didn't say anything else. He shouted and pulled out his saber. A mass of saber light shrouded the two of them. GMO and Luo Kudi turned pale with fright. They reacted quickly and formed an alliance to fight against Dong Wushang. A moment ago, they were still fighting to the death. Now, they were fighting side by side. The thickness of these two's skin made Chu Yang feel ashamed of his inferiority. Chu Yang shook his head and laughed. Suddenly, a sharp sword intent came from afar. The person hadn't arrived yet, but that kind of awe-inspiring aura had already made people feel cold all over. A faint voice said, "Why are you fighting?" "Ah? Boss!" The awe-inspiring sword intent suddenly turned into a spring breeze. A thin figure suddenly appeared. Gu Du-shing! As soon as he saw Chu Yang, Gu Du-shing rushed over in surprise. Chu Yang immediately turned around and greeted him with a smile. Both of them were inexplicably happy to see each other. Chu Yang sensitively saw that Gu Du-shing's face was somewhat pale. Obviously, he was really injured and hadn't recovered yet. "Open your mouth," Chu Yang said. Gu Du-shing didn't have time to speak. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, a pill was suddenly stuffed into his mouth by Chu Yang. In an instant, a stream of pure spiritual power gushed out from his dantian. His whole body felt so comfortable that he wanted to moan. Chu Yang patted his shoulder. Gu Du-shing knew that this must be a rare elixir. He didn't dare to neglect it. He immediately sat down cross-legged and started to cultivate. After an hour, the 5 brothers sat together. Gu Du-shing's injury had actually completely recovered. "Du-shing, although your injury has recovered, don't expose it for these 2 days. At the critical moment, strike," Chu Yang said. "I know. Then I will pretend to be a patient for these 2 days. This is very easy." Gu Du-shing and Chu Yang had not seen each other for a long time. He was excited and spoke more. His voice was cheerful. As he spoke, he started to cultivate. His face immediately turned pale and yellow, as if he was seriously injured. He said, "Is this okay?" Luo Kudi and GMO burst out laughing at the same time. "Second brother Gu is really good." Gu Du-shing knocked each of them on the head. "Damn it! If you call me second brother again, I will cut you up." Everyone laughed together. "There are still 2 days. In these 2 days I will give you a special training," Chu Yang said slowly. "This is related to GMO's marriage. You can't be careless at all. Since GMO has taken a fancy to this daughter-in-law, we will not only fight for her, but also win her beautifully. Fair and square. We can't allow any imperfections in our marriage." Chu Yang paused and said, "Others can't be relied on. We brothers must do our best. Understand?" "Yes." Gu Du-shing, Dong Wushang, and Luo Kudi all agreed solemnly. Ji Mo's heart warmed. His eyes turned red. His lips trembled a few times. He resisted the excitement in his heart and said with a smile, "Good. When I get my daughter-in-law, I will get all of you drunk. Ha ha." His voice was trembling when he said the last 2 laughs. But none of the 4 laughed at him. Gu Du-shing and Dong Wushang, who were known for their cold faces, gently stretched out their hands and patted GMO on the shoulder. "Brother, you understand. We also understand. After this, Heavenly Armament Pavilion will also open in 3 days." Chu Yang revealed a smile and said, "And this time Ao, Xiao, and Mo clans will provide us with a lot of money. Especially Mo Tianyun. He will provide the biggest help to Heavenly Armament Pavilion." Ha ha ha! Everyone laughed. They were overjoyed. Thinking of Mo Tianyun's miserable appearance when he lost his family fortune, this group of unscrupulous people laughed even harder. 1 day later, the sound of galloping cavalry rumbled outside the mountain. Looking down from the top of the mountain, one could see an extremely elite cavalry team roaring from afar like a black dragon. Every single one of them was a rare and precious horse that was hard to find. Every rider on the horse was a 1 in 10,000 expert. They were as majestic as pine trees on the horses. Their figures were tall and straight. The horses were like dragons galloping horizontally and vertically. Their aura could swallow the rivers and mountains. The flag in the front was fluttering in the wind. The flag was black in color. A clump of golden bamboos stood tall and proud in the darkness. It fluttered in the biting cold wind of Mt Dingjun. The aura of a sovereign overlooking the world spread out in a rampant an arrogant manner. Cheers erupted from different directions on Mt Dingjun. They went straight to the sea of clouds. Countless flags of the dark bamboo were erected in succession. One could see that the entire mountain was densely packed with flags of the dark bamboo as far as the eye could see. This momentum was truly heaven-shaking and earth-shattering, and it was extremely vast. The black stream of iron rushed into Mt Dingjun without moving. It seemed as if they had turned a blind eye to the thunderous cheers of the people on the mountain. Jun Shizhu has arrived! Gu Duxing stood beside Chu Yang. He was looking at the cavalrymen rushing into Mt Dingjun without any scruples. They were rushing all the way up. His eyes were emitting a fervent luster. This kind of power, this kind of might, and this kind of aura of a sovereign overlooking the world should belong to a man. But it now belonged to a woman. The cavalrymen of the dark bamboo had already rushed into Mt Dingjun. A long trail of smoke and dust was rushing straight into the sky from the main road behind them. It's no wonder that they can unify the underworld forces of the three heavens, Chu Yang praised from the bottom of his heart. The black cavalrymen rushed onto the platform after a long time. They appeared on the platform with a rumbling sound. They then reined in their horses. The strong horses neighed and stood up. Then they stopped at the same time. The cavalrymen dismounted from their horses and stood straight beside their war horses. A graceful figure dressed in black slowly came down from the carriage and stood there. Her stature wasn't tall. In fact, she looked even shorter than a man. But she took a few steps forward, and an aura of disdain spread out from her body. An invisible power swept across Mt Dingjun in a flash. At this moment, all the people in the mountains and plains were completely silent. This black figure slowly raised her head and insipidly said, "You've been waiting for a long time." Her voice wasn't loud, but it spread throughout the entire Mt Dingjun. There was no reply. Then she swept her eyes around and looked at the surrounding mountains. Suddenly, the entire mountain range felt as cold as the severe winter. The Lord of the Dark Bamboo, the leader of the underworld forces of the three heavens, Jun Shizhu, arrived. Even more, he was completely exhausted, begging for votes. To be continued. Chapter 455. Thank you for your hard work, Minister Jun. Thousands of people on Mt Dingjun roared at the same time. Everyone mobilized their spiritual power, and they shook the entire Mt Dingjun and raised the dust. It covered the sky. Jun Shizhu looked around and smiled. Her demeanor was reserved. She kept people at a distance and didn't speak again. Hundreds of knights formed two columns with a schwa sound and protected Jun Shizhu. Then they walked towards Dukyu's location in an orderly manner. Jun Shizhu's arrival signaled that this war was about to begin. All the major clans had sent important people to discuss this matter. Moreover, they wanted to see Jun Shizhu's attitude. Only one person looked in the direction of Jun Shizhu's troops with a complicated expression on his face. He didn't speak for a long time. This person's clothes were as white as snow. His face was like jade. His demeanor was graceful and calm. His eyes were as deep as the sea. He was tall, and his hair was as black as ink. It was fluttering in the air. He held a purple jade flute in his hand, and it was emitting sparkling and translucent rays of light. Mo Tianji! Mo Tianji had been burning with anxiety after he had received Jun Shizhu's extortion order. He had immediately gathered 10 million in banknotes, and had rushed over overnight to wait for Jun Shizhu. He had arrived several days ago, but he hadn't shown up. It was because he didn't want to meet Mo Tianyun. The two of them had the same mother, but they didn't like each other. Mo Tianyun wanted to pull out Mo Tianji's tendons and skin him whenever he saw him. And Mo Tianji felt both depressed and disgusted when he saw Mo Tianyun. Mo Tianji's plan was only a petty trick in Mo Tianyun's eyes. Moreover, it wasn't elegant. Mo Tianyun's plot was like a child's play in the mud in Mo Tianji's eyes. It was stupid, stupid, and stupid. Such a combination of three Bs made people feel disgusted at first sight. The two brothers had been harmonious on the surface a few years ago, but they had slowly developed into fighting and scheming against each other. Then, it had gradually evolved into a turbulent undercurrent. Then, it had advanced into an open and covert struggle. After that, it had slowly become irreconcilable hatred. However, he had no choice but to look for Mo Tianyun now. Mo Tianji's white clothes fluttered in the wind. His calm and gentle face. Mo Tianyun's bodyguard hurriedly went in to report. Young master, second young master has arrived. Second young master? Mo Tianji? Mo Tianyun snorted and said, "Let him in." Mo Tianji had already arrived outside the door before he finished speaking. He elegantly said, "I'm here." Mo Tianyun, are you ready? Now that they were not in the house, both of them tore off their unnecessary masks of hypocrisy. Calling him by his name. Humph. Mo Tianyun coldly snorted. With a gloomy face, he walked out and stood at the door. He casually said, "Mo Tianyun, as a younger brother of the Mo clan, don't you know how to greet the future clan head? Future patriarch?" Mo Tianji sneered. Then, he impatiently said, "Are you ready? Once you're ready, hurry up and bring Xiaowu back. I'm not interested, and I don't have the time to talk nonsense with you." Mo Tianyun snorted and said, "Of course I will save my little sister. I don't need you to rush me." The experts of the Mo clan had heard the news and rushed over. More and more people came. Mo Tianyun's words naturally became sanctimonious. Mo Tianji wished he could use his big foot to ruthlessly kick this handsome face in front of him. This bastard will die if he doesn't pretend to be righteous. Hurry up. Mo Tianji gently smiled. Lan Mei is still waiting outside. Hearing Lan Mei, Mo Tianyun's face immediately darkened. During this time, his lover and child were tightly controlled by Mo Tianji. If Mo Tianyun wanted to visit, he had to get Mo Tianji's permission. Every time Lan Mei went out on a mission, she would take Mo Tianji's poison before going out. She would be given the antidote when she came back. But this thing didn't make him feel comfortable. Who could stand his woman being tightly controlled by someone else? Even though they were blood brothers. But Mo Tianji was still a man. Mo Tianyun thought of Lan Mei and Mo Tianji every day. It was as if he had eaten a fly. He wanted to vomit blood whenever he thought of it, but there was nothing he could do. The two brothers came out side by side. One was gentle and elegant, and the other had a face full of spring breeze. It seemed that they were a pair of good brothers. Little did they know that the two of them were secretly grinding their teeth. Second brother, Xiaowu will be engaged once she is redeemed. Haha, you also know the person. It's Meng Luo of the Meng clan. Mo Tianyun sighed and said, Meng Luo practices an evil technique. But he is from a big clan. So, he won't treat Xiaowu unfairly. Mo Tianji's complexion turned pale. But it immediately returned to normal. He smiled and said, Big brother is right. I heard that elder sister Lan Mei can dance very well. So, I will certainly appreciate Lan Mei's public dance to celebrate Xiaowu's engagement. Then, all the men in the Tsenglan battlefront will be blessed. Ha ha ha. Mo Tianyun angrily said. You. He naturally knew that the public dance that Mo Tianyun was talking about was definitely a naked dance, or a striptease. And all the men in the Tsenglan battlefront will be blessed was extremely vicious. Mo Tianji smiled and said, Big brother, you don't need to worry. Who would dare to bully us in the Mo clan? A few days ago, there was a reckless green-haired tortoise who dared to spout nonsense to me. I was so angry that I turned his 3-year-old son into a eunuch. Sigh. Speaking of which, I was a little cruel. I feel very guilty. I will turn your woman into a prostitute, and your son into a eunuch if you dare to deal with Xiaowu. How could Mo Tianyun not understand the meaning behind these words? Mo Tianyun was so angry that his hands and feet turned cold. He felt as if he was suffocating. He almost fainted on the spot. A king-level expert of the Mo clan behind him said in a mocking tone. Second young master is too soft-hearted. What's there to feel guilty about turning a child into a eunuch? You must know that a real man cannot stand firm if his heart is not ruthless. A great man must be ruthless. This guy was on Mo Tianyun's side. Naturally, he would not be polite to Mo Tianji. However, he did not know the inside story. So, his words were somewhat awkward. Oh? What do you think, Chang Feng? Mo Tianji modestly asked. I can't do anything to that person at the moment. But that green-haired tortoise is still in my hands. Chang Feng, if you have any good ideas, you can teach me a few moves. Isn't that easy? Mo Qingfeng laughed with contempt. He assumed a teaching posture and said, First of all, you can't let this little guy die. He won't be worth anything if he dies. But you can make him shed a layer of skin every day. Good idea. Mo Tianji praised. And then, there are many ways to mess with him. It would be best to train this little bastard into a human-shaped dog. Ha! But you must let the person who offended you see this. That is, this little bastard's father. Well, it would be best to take his son out for a walk every time you see him. Then, you can immediately restrain him. Mo Qingfeng was not a malicious person. Each of his ideas was more vicious than the last. In addition, after training him, you can hold an auction. Nowadays, some rich people like to play with this kind of child. Haha, during the auction, you can also bring that green-haired tortoise into the bidding. But you can't let him win. What a brilliant idea! What a brilliant plan! Wonderful! Mo Tianji clapped his hands and praised. He laughed and said, That's very reasonable. I have decided. If that cuckold dares to offend me again, I will deal with his son like this. Mo Tianyun's breathing became heavy. His face had almost turned into the color of a pig's liver. By the way, Qingfeng, that bastard's wife is also in my hands. Ha! Mo Tianji lowered his voice. But he deliberately let Mo Tianyun hear him. That's even simpler. Mo Qingfeng slapped his thigh. With a woman in my hands, I can play with that bastard to death. Before he finished speaking, Mo Tianyun could not bear it anymore. He ruthlessly slapped Mo Qingfeng's face. Then, he roared fiercely. You bastard! What are you talking about? You are too presumptuous. Mo Qingfeng touched his face and was stunned. In an instant, his heart was at a loss. He was angry and aggrieved. Tears almost flowed out of his eyes. Fuck, this is unreasonable. Fuck, I am helping you vent your anger and humiliate the second young master. Why did you hit me? What did I do wrong? My devotion was all for your sake, eldest young master. Mo Qingfeng looked at Mo Tianyun with an aggrieved expression. He felt so aggrieved that tears were rolling down his cheeks. You have wronged me. Mo Tianyun was so angry that he couldn't vent his anger. So, he kicked him again. You, second brother he is still young. And you are instilling these things in him. These things, you are simply devoid of conscience. The experts of the Mo clan were dumbfounded as they looked at Mo Tianyun. They were so surprised that it seemed as if they had discovered an alien. Fuck, what's going on? Heartless? Second young master is still young? When did the eldest young master become so protective of his brothers? Moreover, isn't this the eldest young master's specialty? He used to be exultant when he talked about it. Moreover, Mo Qingfeng was basically taught by him. How come he has become a righteous gentleman now? So pure? But who would dare to ask Mo Tianyun when they saw his angry face? Mo Tianyun vented his anger. Then, he walked to Mo Tianji's side. He chuckled and said, Second brother, you don't need to listen to this nonsense. Let's go and bring Xiaowu back. No matter how big the matter is, it's not as important as your sister who's related by blood. Mo Tianji put on a fake smile and said, Elder brother, you are right. Therefore, the two brothers respectfully walked forward. Jun Shizhu arrived at Dukyu's place. She saw that Dookie was treating the wounds on his arms. They had almost healed. However, she could still see that his arms had been pierced through. His arms had been pierced through by someone. And there were 20 holes in them. Jun Shiju was shocked. Who can injure Dookie like this in 3 days? To be able to beat Dookie to such a state, taking his life would be as easy as flipping a hand. Chapter 456. Jun Shiju's complexion sank. She then asked in a dignified manner, "Which old bastard came down?" Duke Yu's expression was very strange. It seemed as if he was somewhat confused and perplexed. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he asked in a serious manner, "Shiju, do you think that there is such a kind of sworn brother in this world?" Jun Shiju was startled. She thought for a while and said, "I can't say that there isn't such a thing. But I haven't seen it in reality." Dookie nodded. He then said in a silent manner, "But I've seen it." He sighed. "So, there really is such a thing?" Human nature was the most despicable thing. Dookie had never believed in feelings. Especially when he encountered a so-called sworn brother in life and death situations. He would beat them until they were at the end of their rope. Then, he would put forward a condition: only one of them could survive. Dookie would coldly observe the ugly human nature of these two people whenever he saw them killing each other. And he would toy with the so-called friendship to his heart's content. He would mercilessly whip and ridicule their so-called friendship. Then, he would finally kill them. He had done such a thing more than once. No one had ever had the courage to exchange their own life for the life of their sworn brother in front of Dookie. That was because they believed that a person like Dookie would never sympathize with them. In fact, he wouldn't cherish heroes and honor heroes. However, Chu Yang had used his own flesh and blood to block a blade for Dong Wushang just a day ago. Dong Wushang had also sacrificed his own life for Chu Yang. Could it be that Dong Wushang didn't know that I could crush him to death with just one finger? He must have known. But why? This matter had subverted Dookyu's thoughts. Human nature is despicable. Everyone in the world can be killed. Jun Shiju didn't answer. She merely snorted and said, "Who hurt you? Don't ask about this matter," Dooku insipidly said. "It's not as serious as you think." Jun Shiju nodded and said, "It's fine as long as you know." She knew that no one would be able to ask Dooku anything as long as he didn't want to say it. Asking him would be in vain. While they were talking, Jun Lulu and Emo Qingwu also walked in. Emo Qingwu had changed into a red dress, looking smart and adorable. Her delicate body, which had just begun to grow, was like a slender and elegant orchid that was about to bloom into a flower bud. Her small face was bright, and her fine black hair flowed down her head smoothly. A delicate butterfly made of red cloud steel spread its wings above her head, ready to take flight. Her eyes were black and white, and her long eyelashes were like a dream. Her expression was innocent with a hint of intelligence, and her pointed chin had a hint of stubbornness. "Where is Big Brother Chu Yang? Is he in this mountain?" Emo Qingwu impatiently pouted and asked. She looked at Jun Lulu with pleading eyes. She had a delicate and pitiful look on her face. "Chu Yang?" Dooku subconsciously said. "I just fought with him, ah?" Emo Qingwu's small mouth opened slightly. She immediately became anxious. "Is he injured?" Dooku's spirit was shaken. He rolled his eyes and said, "What does it matter if he's injured or not? Can I just beat him up?" "No!" Emo Qingwu glared at him. She pouted and looked at Dooku fiercely. "Why did you beat my big brother Chu Yang?" Dooku scratched his head and looked at Jun Lulu. "Where did this little girl come from? Did you bring this little girl to teach me a lesson?" Jun Lulu couldn't help but chuckle and said, "She's King of Hell Chu's darling. You can say that you beat King of Hell Chu in front of anyone but her. Did you really beat him up?" Emo Qingwu glared at Dooku. Her eyes had turned somewhat red. "Did you beat him up in pain?" Dooku immediately raised his hands in surrender when he saw Emo Qingwu's clear eyes. "I didn't beat him up. Instead, he beat me up. You look at me, you look at me. I'm so pitiful. Yu stretched out his arm to let this little girl see the injury on his arm. He wanted to gain some sympathy. He knew that Jun Shiju wasn't an outsider since she had brought her here. So, he treated her as if she was a child. And Mo Qingwu heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She said, You obviously can't beat him up. But… She rolled her eyes and said, I can't do anything if he beats you up. She jumped to Jun Lulu's side as she said this. Then, she hugged her arm and gently shook it. She said, Elder sister Lu, lend me your mirror. Yu's forehead was filled with black lines. I can't beat him up, but he should beat me up. Is there such a theory in this world? At this moment, a report came in from outside. Minister Jun, Minister Yu, representatives of major clans have come to pay a visit. Jun Shiju thought for a while and said, Little Yu, you go and receive them. Just say a few words and let them go. Yu nodded and rushed out as if he was escaping. He was somewhat scared of this little girl who had suddenly arrived. So, there's someone in this world who can be more unreasonable than me. Moreover, it's a little girl. The representatives of major clans left after a short while. Yu didn't return. It was unknown where he had run off to. Is Minister Jun here? Mo Tianyun and Mo Tianji of the Mo clan have come to pay a visit. Mo Tianji's voice resounded from outside. Mo Qingwu's entire body trembled. Her complexion turned deathly pale. Second brother, do you really want to redeem me and let me marry that scoundrel? Mo Qingwu had misunderstood again. Mo Tianji had come to redeem Mo Qingwu this time. But it wasn't to give her to Meng Luo. Mo Tianji had made a big fuss with his clan after he had come to know about Mo Qingwu's matter. Then, he had proposed to take his little sister to his place so that he could take care of her. But he had been reprimanded by Great Elder Mo Wu Xian. So, he had come here with the determination to take Mo Qingwu away. Jun Shiju looked at Mo Qingwu with pity and said, You too, go and sit behind the screen first. Jun Lulu complied, and walked over with Mo Qingwu. The two of them had just sat down when they heard Jun Shiju's deep voice from outside. Let them roll in! The sound of footsteps was heard after a short while. Then two people said in unison, Greetings, Minister Jun. Jun Shiju was sitting on an armchair. She snorted and said, Have you brought the silver? Mo Tianji asked in a deep voice. Is my little sister safe? Jun Shiju coldly said, Don't you trust the credibility of Dark Bamboo? Mo Tianji gently said, Dark Bamboo's name shakes the world. So I naturally trust it. But this kidnapping is too outrageous. May I ask Minister Jun what's the cause of this matter? Jun Shiju coldly said, Mo Tianji, I want the silver. I don't want your nonsense. Take out the silver if you have it. And get lost if you don't. Don't show off your eloquence in front of me. Mo Tianji was silent for a moment. Then, he said, The banknotes are here since that's the case. Mo Tianyun had given him the banknotes. So, he took them out. Mo Tianyun became even more jealous in his heart. He had always been conceited that he was on par with Mo Tianji. In fact, he was even better than him. However, Mo Tianji was speaking frankly and with assurance in front of Jun Shiju today. In fact, he could even question her. But he was intimidated by Jun Shiju's fame and power. So, he couldn't speak. He was afraid that his voice would tremble if he spoke. However, he didn't know that Mo Tianji's heart was beating like a drum in the face of Jun Shiju's deliberate coercion. But he was worried about his little sister. Moreover, he was filled with indignation. So, he remained calm and collected. Golden Hand! Jun Shiju coldly shouted. Your subordinate is here! A person appeared in the tent with a schwa sound. Huakyo, come and check the banknotes. Jun Shiju insipidly said. See if there's any mistake. Mo Tianji wrinkled his brows. Jun Shiju wants to play tricks? Are you kidding me? Who in the world would dare to give you fake banknotes? Would I make a mistake in front of you? I don't want to court death. Golden Hand Huakyo was a thin, middle-aged man. His hands were dry and steady. He took the banknotes worth 10 million taels. Then, he wiped his saliva with his finger. Then, he started to count them one by one in front of Mo Tianji. Mo Tianji stared at him attentively as he counted the banknotes. His heart suddenly jumped. This isn't right. Minister Jun, Golden Hand Huakyo said in a puzzled manner. 10 million taels of banknotes? This is clearly 20 million taels of banknotes with 40 sheets of white paper. This is too much. Who did this? 40 sheets of white paper? Jun Shiju's complexion sank. Is that so? Wait a minute! Mo Tianji shouted. He had already counted the banknotes before he came here. 10 million taels of banknotes wasn't a small amount. How could they turn into white paper here? That guy must have done something. But his movements are so slow. How did he do it? I didn't even see it. Can I take a look? Mo Tianji asked. Golden Hand Huakyo didn't seem to understand. He nodded foolishly and said, Okay. Then, he handed the banknotes back. Mo Tianji took them, and his heart sank. It feels different. He turned them over a little, and saw that they were all white paper. He couldn't help but feel dizzy. What's going on? Jun Shiju frowned and asked. Mo Tianyan angrily said. What's the meaning of this? Minister Jun, even a thief has a code of conduct. Blackmail shouldn't be done like this. He couldn't stay calm. After all, he was a pauper at the moment. He didn't have any money. He wouldn't be able to get even a single cent if the bet wasn't over. He would lose face if Jun Shiju blackmailed him. Jun Shiju's phoenix-like eyes turned cold. She narrowed her eyes and coldly said, Blackmail you? So what? Mo Tianji looked on with cold eyes. He saw that Jun Shiju's limpid eyes had begun to emit a murderous aura. He couldn't help but shiver in his heart. He knew that the opposite party had blackmailed him for 40 million taels. So, he hastily said, it must be little brother's negligence. I remember that I had some white papers in my bosom. I must have mixed them. Please forgive me, Minister Jun. I will make up for it. Jun Shiju meaningfully looked at Mo Tianji. Then, she faintly smiled. Is that so? She couldn't help but say in her heart, this Mo Tianji is worthy of the title Master of Calculation and Manipulation. He has seen through my intention to deal with them. I don't really want the 40 million taels of banknotes. However, she saw Mo Tianji take out the banknotes. He then said with a smile, I will give you the banknotes one by one this time. Don't count them wrong. Jun Shiju smiled and said, All right, take them. Mo Tianyun finally felt relieved. He said, I'll have to trouble Minister Jun. Please ask my little sister to come out. Minister Jun is very busy. We won't disturb you any longer. We will take my little sister back. Thank you very much for taking care of her during this time. Mo Tianji had paid the banknotes. So, Mo Tianyun naturally had to come out and play the good guy. Jun Shiju frowned and said, What? Mo Tianyun, are you sure? When did I say that you can take her away after paying the banknotes? Chapter 457. Mo Tianyun stared blankly. He scratched his head and asked, What is the meaning of this, Minister Jun? He thought, what kind of rule is this if you don't release her after paying the money? Jun Shiju coldly said, Didn't you read the letter clearly? And now you are looking for me to release her? What a joke! Mo Tianyun and Mo Tianji were stunned. Both of them took out the extortion letter from their bosoms, and read it again. Then, they looked at each other in dismay. There's no problem. Read it out, Jun Shiju said. The daughter of Mo clan, Qing Wu, is currently in dark bamboo hands. Quickly pay 10 million silver taels. Otherwise, the hostage will be killed. Mo Tianyun read it out in a puzzled manner. He frowned, but didn't find any problem. Mo Tianji's eyes flashed, and he immediately realized that this was bad. Jun Shiju sneered and said, I only said that I wouldn't kill the hostage as long as you pay the money. When did I say that I would hand her over to you? Don't tell me that your sister can eat my food, drink my water, wear my clothes, use my things, and live in my place without paying money? And Mo Tianyun was flabbergasted. He was so angry that he couldn't speak. These 10 million silver taels are only for your sister's food expenses. Jun Shiju insipidly said. Please go back if you don't have anything else to say. Of course, you're welcome to stay here if you want to. You only need to pay 10 million silver taels for food expenses. Behind the curtain, Jun Lulu tightly covered her mouth to prevent herself from laughing out loud. I didn't expect that my elder sister had such an idea. It's a brilliant plan. Mo Tianyun stood outside the door. He angrily asked, Why did you pull me out? You can still go in. Mo Tianji said. As long as you can come up with 10 million silver taels. Mo Tianyun snorted and said, Then, why did you give her 40 million silver taels? That's clearly extortion. I said that you're stupid. But you're stupid to this extent. Mo Tianji looked at him with contempt and said, Jun Shiju is looking for trouble. Can't you see that? You and I would have been out of luck if we hadn't paid the money. That 10 million silver taels is extortion. That 40 million taels are to buy our safety. You can't even see this point. What right do you have to be the Mo clan's young clan lord? Mo Tianyun became furious. You! Mo Tianyun shook his head and said, You do your thing. I won't stop you if you want to go back and look for Jun Shiju. I have something to do. I need to find someone. He didn't wait for Mo Tianyun's reply. He simply turned around and left. Mo Tianyun spat out a mouthful of saliva and touched his pocket. Right now, his pockets were really empty. He could not help but clench his teeth. Then, he bitterly muttered to himself, Let's see if you, Mo Tianji, can still be arrogant in front of me after I win that billion. He sneered and left as well. Little did he know that at this moment, Mo Tianji was also cursing in his heart. This bastard is actually gambling with his clan's property. If he loses, then you, Mo Tianyun, are nothing. Not even comparable to a dog's fart. Chu Yang was with Gu Du-Xing. Du-Xing, what happened to your injuries? Chu Yang asked. Mo Tianyun did it. Gu Du-Xing casually said. I heard about this matter. So, I went to look for Mo Tianyun to settle the score. But I ended up being besieged by him and a large number of experts. I killed a few of them and got a little injured. Gu Du-Xing said it casually, but how could Chu Yang not hear the danger hidden in this light voice? Gu Du-Xing probably escaped from death. What exactly happened? Is it worth you taking such a big risk? Chu Yang frowned. Gu Du-Xing looked at him in shock. Don't you know? Chu Yang was taken aback. What do I know? Gu Du-Xing was furious. What's wrong with GMO and the rest? How could they hide such a big matter from you until now? Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. He said, About Qing Wu. Gu Du-Xing let out a long howl. GMO! The few of you, get your asses over here! In an instant, Dong Wushang and the rest came over. Gu Du-Xing's eyes widened. He said angrily, Why didn't anyone tell boss about little Wu? GMO scratched his head and widened his eyes. What? Didn't boss already know? Chu Yang did not know whether to laugh or cry. When did I know? Luo Kudi, Dong Wushang, and GMO looked at each other in dismay. Then, they sighed at the same time. We saw that you dealt with Meng Luo as soon as you arrived. And you put the Meng clan in a difficult situation. Then, you dealt with Mo Tianyun in the gambling house. We thought that you knew. How come you still don't know? Dong Wushang and Luo Kudi's faces darkened. This was a big problem. Chu Yang frowned. I dealt with Meng Luo because you wanted to snatch his storm leopard. And I dealt with Mo Tianyun because he didn't treat little Wu well. What does this have to do with Qing Wu? Chu Yang wanted to inquire about Mo Qing Wu's whereabouts as soon as he arrived here. But he thought that everyone was busy with Jimo's marriage. Everyone was under pressure. Moreover, Mo Qingwu was still very young. So, she shouldn't have any big problems in the Mo clan. So, he thought that he would go and fetch Mo Qingwu after he had dealt with this matter with GMO. Did something happen to little Wu? Mo Tianyun and Meng Luo were very close some time ago. They must have talked about little Wu's matter. And they encouraged Meng Luo to propose marriage to the Mo clan on the basis of the alliance between the two clans. Gu Duxing slowly said. Propose marriage? Chu Yang stood up with a schwa sound. He angrily said, Are Meng Luo and Mo Tianyun courting death? He recalled that Meng Luo practiced an evil technique. It's so vicious that they want to harm Qingwu? Suddenly, a murderous aura burst out from his body. It couldn't be contained. Even Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang felt cold all over. And Meng Luo followed the good advice. He immediately proposed marriage to the Mo clan. He wanted to take Mo Qingwu as his concubine. And the great elder of the Mo clan, Mo Wu Xian, made the final decision after some discussion. He agreed to this marriage. Gu Duxing said everything in one breath. Chu Yang was so angry that his hair stood up. He clenched his teeth so hard that they made grinding sounds. His body was also trembling. Concubine? Meng Luo. I, Chu Yang, announced that you bastard have won the big prize. I heard about this matter at that time. So I immediately went to look for Mo Tianji. But Mo Tianji had already gone deep into the Tsanglan continent by that time. So I turned back and went to look for Mo Tianyun, and fought with him. Gu Duxing's eyes exposed a cold ray of light as he said, But big brother, you're here now. So, you should make the decision. You don't need to have any misgivings. We'll do whatever you say. Dong Wushang and the other two said in unison. That's right. Little Wu is only 11 years old. The Mo clan is obviously devoid of conscience. Big brother, don't worry. We'll do whatever you say. Humph! It seems that I was too lenient. Chu Yang was extremely regretful. Motherfucker. How could I have let that bastard Meng Luo go back alive if I had known about this earlier? Someone rushed in from outside. An Imperial Guard reported. Second young master, there's a matter. Dong Wushang, GMO, and Luo Kudi turned around at the same time. Which second young master did you call? The Imperial Guard's forehead was full of sweat. Second young master Dong, the second young master of the Mo clan, Mo Tianji, has come to pay a visit. He said that he has an important matter to discuss with you. Chu Yang's eyes turned cold as he said, Let him come here. I'm looking for him to settle the account. The Imperial Guard didn't dare to stay any longer when he saw that the faces of these masters had turned as cold as frost. He rolled and crawled, and immediately rushed back. Someone hurriedly came in after a short while. He said from afar, Dong Wushang, is Chu Yang here? It was Mo Tianji. And the person he was looking for was Chu Yang. Mo Tianji had already known that Chu Yang had arrived in the three heavens. But he felt that he didn't have the face to see Chu Yang. I couldn't even protect my little sister. She had given me a peerless treasured saber, but my own clan had snatched it away. This is such a shameful thing. How can I explain this to Chu Yang? He recalled how Chu Yang had earnestly entrusted him with the task when they had parted in the past. He had solemnly vowed to protect Chu Yang, but he hadn't done anything yet. So, how could he not feel ashamed? Therefore, he had immediately hidden away in shame when he had found out that Chu Yang had arrived at Mt Dingjun. In fact, he didn't even have the nerve to participate in such a lively gambling event. He couldn't wait to hide from Chu Yang. But Jun Shiju's matter had been exposed. So, Mo Tianji had to thicken his skin and look for Chu Yang even if he was embarrassed. After all, he had heard that Chu Yang and Duke Wei were friends. Moreover, Duke Wei had taken the initiative to act as a notary for the gambling event between Chu Yang and his elder brother. Therefore, he had immediately come to look for Chu Yang. Retrieving Mo Qingwu would be a piece of cake as long as Chu Yang was willing to ask Duke Wei to act on his behalf. It must be said that Mo Tianji's brain worked exceptionally fast. And Mo Tianji had arrived at the right time. He had arrived just in time for Chu Yang's outburst of anger. So, he had hit the jackpot. "Chu Yang, you're here!" And Mo Tianji was pleasantly surprised. "I've come to ask you for a favor." "You still have the nerve to ask me for a favor?" Chu Yang looked at him furiously. "And Mo Tianji, you can't even protect your little sister. You let her be bullied and humiliated. And you've come to ask me for a favor? Are you joking with me?" And Mo Tianji's face turned red. He stammered, "I've come to discuss with you," Chu Yang coldly said. "What do you want to discuss with me?" And Mo Tianji was helpless. So, he humbly apologized. His handsome face had turned red. "I only want an explanation," Chu Yang angrily said. "What happened to little Wu? What do you plan to do? What kind of shameful thing has your Mo clan done? I've come to discuss this matter with you." And Mo Tianji helplessly said, "It seems that only you can act on this matter." "Act on my behalf? Do I have so much faith in your Mo clan?" Chu Yang was surprised. "Little Wu has run away from home. But she has fallen into the hands of Jun Shizhu, the Lord of Dark Bamboo. She's currently being detained. And she's doing her best to torment our Mo clan." And Mo Tianji anxiously said, "I've heard that you're very familiar with Duke Wei." Chu Yang immediately became vigilant. "First, tell me clearly." And Mo Tianji then narrated the matter from when Mo Qing Wu had run away from home until now. He bitterly sighed and said, "I now understand that Jun Shizhu didn't kidnap Mo Qing Wu. She probably doesn't find our Mo clan pleasing to the eye. So, she's deliberately tormenting us. I wouldn't have had any objection if this matter didn't involve little Wu. But the problem is that the little house is with her." Chu Yang frowned and said, "What do you plan to do with little Wu if she gets out? Send her back to the clan?" "Sending her back to the clan is impossible." And Mo Tianji resolutely and decisively said, "I will take her far away." Chapter 458. And Mo Tianji thought for a while. Then, he made a prompt decision and said, "All right. Now that the clan is in crisis, Mo Tianyun has mortgaged a small part of his property. If Mo Tianyun wins, I must immediately take action and take down Mo Tianyun. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for me to move forward if Mo Tianyun relies on his strong financial resources to develop his strength. If Mo Tianyun were to lose, it would be a heaven-sent opportunity for Mo Tianji. I will settle accounts with your Mo clan sooner or later." Chu Yang looked coldly at Mo Tianji. He then said gloomily, "I wouldn't care if little Wu is well and loved. But your Mo clan has mistreated little Wu. So I might as well tell you this. Whether it's you or Mo Tianyun who will be in power in the future, I will take back what I owe little Wu. No one in the entire heavens can take advantage of me without paying a price if I, Chu Yang, don't want to," Chu Yang said heavily. Then, he didn't wait for Mo Tianji to reply. He strode out and said, "I'm going to look for Duke Yu. I'll go with you." Mo Tianji's face turned red as he followed Chu Yang. He had never been scolded in such an embarrassing manner. However, Mo Tianji had no choice but to swallow it. "Who told your clan to be so useless and heartless? You guys don't need to go. Seize the time to cultivate. We can't afford to lose tomorrow's battle," Chu Yang said to Gu Duxing and the others who had followed him. Gu Duxing nodded. He took his brothers back to continue their training. "Brother Chu, why are you so good to my younger sister?" Mo Tianji could see that Chu Yang was much more attentive to Mo Qing Wu than to her elder brother. "I like Qing Wu very much," Chu Yang replied vaguely. "But you like her too much," Mo Tianji muttered in his heart. But he didn't dare to say it out loud. Chu Yang naturally didn't dare to let him know that he liked his younger sister. He wanted to wait for her to grow up so that he could marry her. Mo Tianji would fight him to the death if that happened. "Yi is as beastly as Meng Luo. Don't worry. I will clean up the evil tendencies in the Mo clan bit by bit if I have the power. Mo Tianji sighed and said, Brother Mo, I have something to say. But I don't know if I should say it or not, Chu Yang said as he walked. Please speak. Setting your sights on only one clan is a bit limiting. Moreover, it's not flexible enough, Chu Yang said in a careful manner. How could I not know? Mo Tianji let out a long sigh. Mo Tianyun and I were fighting for power. Could it be that I, Mo Tianji, was fighting for the position of the clan lord? I, Mo Tianji, have deep feelings for my clan. He couldn't bear to see his clan fall at the hands of Mo Tianyun. Mo Tianyun is narrow-minded. He is vicious and merciless. He will do anything to achieve his goals. The Mo clan cannot fall into his hands. He took a deep breath and said, I want to bring my clan in charge into the upper three heavens. Fulfill the wish of the Mo clan's ancestors for dozens of generations. Chu Yang remained silent. He sped up and said, I wish you success. The two of them hurriedly rushed forward, and soon arrived at the place where Duke Yu was. Brother Yu, Chu Yang has come to visit. Please come out and meet me. Chu Yang shouted. His voice spread far and wide. Inside, Mo Qingwu jumped up and danced in the air. Its elder brother Chu Yang. This voice would appear in her dreams almost every night. It would always gently comfort her. Xiao Wu, don't be afraid. Xiao Wu, you have me. Xiao Wu, now, she had finally heard it. Mo Qingwu jumped up and cheered. Then, she fell down, and suddenly became startled. She pricked up her small ears, and nervously listened to the outside. She suddenly grabbed Jun Lulu's hand and anxiously said, Elder Sister Lu, did I hear wrong? Someone was really shouting, right? That was Elder Brother Chu Yang's voice, right? I wasn't dreaming, right? Jun Lulu held back her laughter and said, I didn't hear it. Mo Qingwu hung her head dejectedly. She sat down on the ground and said, Am I really dreaming? Jun Shiju's voice resounded. Lu, you look after this little girl. I will take a look at this king of hell Chu. Mo Qingwu was startled. Then, she became ecstatic. So, it wasn't a dream. She got up, and was about to rush out. But Jun Lulu didn't manage to grab her. She saw that this little girl had reached the door, and had quickly turned around and ran back. She plunged her head in front of the mirror, and anxiously looked left and right. Then, she turned around and rushed out again. Jun Lulu's eyes were sharp, and her hands were quick. She held her and whispered, Don't worry. Let your elder brother Chu Yang and elder sister talk business first. Then I will give you to your elder brother Chu Yang. Mo Qingwu's eyes were filled with tears. She revealed an intensely unwilling look. But she eventually nodded in a well-behaved manner. I want to listen. Jun Lulu repeatedly agreed. Okay. As long as you don't make any noise. Mo Qingwu silently nodded. Then she lowered her head. Her eyes were already red. After the ecstasy passed, she only felt boundless grievances bubbling up in her heart. I want to tell elder brother Chu Yang about everything. I've suffered too much in the past year. Boo-hoo, the sound of footsteps came from outside. Chu Yang shouted. Then, he saw someone come out and invite him in. He walked inside without thinking. Mo Tianji also wanted to follow him. But he was stopped by an imperial guard. The guard said, Minister Jun only wants to see Minister Chu. Mo Tianji was helpless. He had no choice but to wait outside. Chu Yang walked in, and saw a black-clothed woman. She was standing in the room with her back towards him. Her hair was like a cloud of mist, and her figure was graceful. She was wearing ordinary black clothes. But it gave people a feeling that she was in the clouds. It seemed as if she was an ethereal immortal. She was riding the clouds and riding the wind. Your Excellency is... Chu Yang's pupils shrank. He faintly guessed. Minister Jun, right? Minister Chu has good eyesight. Jun Shiju slowly turned around. Her sharp eyes looked at Chu Yang's face. Chu Yang felt as if a steel needle had fiercely pierced his face twice. Jun Shiju's face was covered with a black veil, so it couldn't be seen what she looked like. But her eyes were like bright stars in the night sky, so people couldn't look at her directly. Minister Chu must have come for Mo Qingwu, Jun Shiju insipidly said. Chu Yang's mind shivered. He said, Yes. Mo Tianji must have gone to ask for help? Jun Shiju smiled. Yes, Chu Yang calmly admitted. Sure enough. I deliberately made things difficult for Mo Tianji because I wanted Minister Chu to come here for a chat. Jun Shiju's voice contained a cold smile as she said, I would have given you too much face if I had come to pay you a visit. So I had no choice but to resort to this plan. Minister Chu, please don't take offense. Chu Yang smiled. Minister Jun is an expert of this generation. You're a senior expert. You have a high position and power. You're the overlord of this generation. So, Chu Yang should have come to pay a visit to you. Jun Shiju had unleashed her imposing aura when Chu Yang had come in. She had turned around and created an aura of a monarch overlooking the world. And this aura had shrouded Chu Yang. At the same time, she had been carefully observing Chu Yang's expression, voice, eyes, and even the movements of his muscles. However, she had discovered that Chu Yang hadn't changed in the slightest. He was the same as he had been when he had come in. He was neither arrogant nor overbearing. In fact, even his pulse hadn't changed. It was rare to see such a young man with such willpower among the heroes of the world. Jun Shiju's eyes slightly flashed with a mysterious light. She thought, no wonder little you values him so much. This young man is really extraordinary. Minister Jun, there's no harm in speaking your mind, Chu Yang said. Minister Chu, what do you think of my dark bamboo? Jun Shiju pondered for a moment. Then, she suddenly asked. Dark bamboo dominates the upper three heavens. So, it's naturally a first-class force. Chu Yang pondered for a moment and said, Such a force is enough to dominate a region even in the upper three heavens. It's a pity that there are few top-notch experts. Otherwise, dark bamboo wouldn't have been the ruler of the upper three heavens. It would have been a veritable overlord of the upper three heavens. It's a pity that there are few top-notch experts. Jun Shiju slowly repeated. Her eyes exposed a smiling expression. That's good. I can return Mo Qingwu to you. Jun Shiju didn't beat around the bush and said, But I want Minister Chu to promise me something. Or give me a promise. I never make any promises. Chu Yang insipidly said. I never make promises to anyone or anything. He looked at Jun Shiju with a serious expression and said, Minister Jun must be aware that the so-called promises are only used for betrayal. I don't want to break my promise to anyone. A promise is too heavy for me. The look of appreciation in Jun Shiju's eyes became even more intense. She said, That's good. Then you don't have to promise me anything. But Minister Chu, you have to promise me something at an appropriate time in the future. How about it? She smiled and said, It's a request that won't embarrass you. Chu Yang pondered. Jun Shiju's words were simple. But could it be that the dark bamboo's request was simple? Minister Chu has just arrived here. So you can't contend with a big clan yet. In exchange, I, Jun Shiju, can guarantee that no one will snatch Mo Qingwu away from you. Jun Shiju smiled and stated her condition. All right. Chu Yang made a prompt decision and agreed. This was the most troublesome matter for him at present. It's a deal. Even a galloping horse can't catch up. Both of them looked at each other and smiled. Jun Shiju felt relieved in her heart. This way, we'll have an opportunity to turn things around when that peerless master arrives. Moreover, there's still some time left. Chu Yang will be entangled with many things during this period of time. He will be in constant trouble. Moreover, his ambition will be very big. So, why would she worry about her relationship with Chu Yang? Jun Shiju hadn't thought that the peerless master she had imagined was standing in front of her at this moment. Jun Shiju gently smiled. Then, her body fluttered like a wisp of black smoke, and disappeared from Chu Yang's sight. Jun Lulu gently released Mo Qingwu from behind the curtain, and quietly disappeared. Then, a voice that had been suppressed for a long time suddenly burst out. "Brother Chu Yang!" Her voice was so loud that it almost broke her throat. "Qingwu?" Chu Yang's entire body shook. He suddenly turned his head in pleasant surprise. He saw a petite figure rushing towards him as if her life depended on it. When she was halfway there, she suddenly flew up and pounced towards him. Chu Yang subconsciously opened his arms. His eyes couldn't help but turn red. He felt a burst of fragrant wind in his arms. Then, a soft body wrapped itself around his body like an octopus. And Mo Qingwu firmly stuffed her small head into his bosom. She felt happy, sad, and satisfied at the same time. She flattened her small mouth, and her voice had already changed. "Brother Chu Yang, you've finally come, boo-hoo!" She burst into tears before she could finish speaking. She opened her small nose, and greedily breathed in Chu Yang's scent. She suddenly felt so happy that she wanted to cry. She felt so happy that her heart ached. How long have I been looking forward to this embrace? How many times have I dreamed of it? Chu Yang held her tightly, and couldn't speak. Only his heart was beating intensely. "Little Wu Qingwu, I've come. I won't let you suffer any grievances. My Qingwu." Chapter 459. Qingwu. Chu Yang hugged this soft body tightly. His voice was almost hoarse. His heart trembled as he called out this name with a trembling voice. And Mo Qingwu used all her strength to squeeze her petite head into Chu Yang's chest. She used all her strength to control herself so that she wouldn't cry out loud. However, her small mouth had already become extremely flat, and tears silently gushed out from her eyes. She was holding it in so much that she actually felt a little dizzy. Chu Yang felt that his clothes on his chest were quickly soaking. Then, the soaking area slowly and rapidly expanded. And Mo Qingwu's body trembled slightly in his arms. However, she still didn't say a word. She clenched her teeth tightly. However, the two hands that were hugging him became more and more forceful. What kind of grievances had she suffered in this year? At this moment, she needed to vent. Vent the grievances in her heart. Chu Yang knew. Therefore, Chu Yang didn't ask anything now. If he asked, Mo Qingwu would only feel more uncomfortable. Just let her be in his arms. Just let her be in his arms and feel his feelings for her. Chu Yang quietly hugged her. He didn't speak. After a long time, Mo Qingwu's body trembled slightly. Then, it slowly calmed down. Her throat made a moaning sound. She coughed a few times in Chu Yang's arms. Chu Yang could feel Mo Qingwu's breath coming out of her small mouth. It made his skin feel a little hot. Mo Qingwu tried her best to lower her head. She finally moved her head away from Chu Yang's bosom a little. But she still held him tightly. She used her free hand to wipe her tears with extreme caution. Her movements were very light. It seemed that she was afraid that Chu Yang would find out what she was doing. She didn't want Big Brother Chu Yang to see her tears after being separated for more than a year. She wanted to be happy. She wanted to smile at Brother Chu Yang. However, she couldn't help but cry. Tears of joy, tears of grievance, tears of sadness, tears of finally meeting again. She wiped hard. She wanted to wipe away her tears. Then, she raised her head and smiled at Brother Chu Yang. Brother Chu Yang, I missed you so much. She wanted to show Brother Chu Yang the happy smile that Brother Chu Yang liked to see. She wanted to let this smile tell Brother Chu Yang that she was fine. Because you finally came. No matter what happened, it was all good. It was the best. However, the more he wiped, the more tears he shed. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't wipe them all away. She was a little flustered and hated herself. Why did she have to cry? Don't cry, little Wu. Brother Chu Yang is already here. Why are you still crying? You're safe. You're fine. With Brother Chu Yang by your side, No one can hurt you, she tried hard to convince herself, but she couldn't stop herself from crying. In the end, she gave up and let her tears flow out. She sobbed and said, "Brother Chuyang, I'm sorry. I want to cry when I see you." Chuyang gently stroked her long hair. He felt that his eyes were a little dry. He said, "If you want to cry, then cry. Big brother Chuyang will accompany you here. My light dance, regardless of crying or laughing, I like it. Everyone is happy." He hadn't even finished speaking when he heard a wah sound. And Mo Ching-woo opened her mouth and started to cry. She cried so hard that her heart was broken. "Boo-hoo. Brother Chuyang, I miss you so much. Boo-hoo, I dreamed of you that day. Boo-hoo." And Mo Ching-woo sobbed and cried. She used Chuyang's clothes to wipe her tears. She poured her heart out at the same time. She couldn't remember anything now. The grievances that she had suffered had almost made her collapse several times. She had thrown them to the back of her mind. She only wanted Brother Chuyang to know how much she missed him, how much I yearned for Brother Chuyang's embrace. "This is the only thing in the world that can make me feel at ease." Chuyang held Mo Ching-woo in his arms. He slowly walked a few steps, and sat down on the armchair that Jun Shiju had sat on. He let this delicate and small body kneel on his lap. He tenderly looked at Mo Ching-woo as she sobbed and poured her heart out. Her rosy little mouth flattened. There was a look of grievance on her face. She was very careful. It seemed as if she was afraid that Brother Chuyang would get tired of her. Gradually, the careful look disappeared. What was left was only grievance and longing. Slowly, the grievance also disappeared. What was left was only longing. It seemed as if Mo Ching-woo hadn't felt any grievance or pain in the past year or so. There was only longing. There was nothing else. Mo Ching-woo lowered her head as she spoke. But she slowly began to gather the courage to raise her head and look at Chuyang. Her eyes were brimming with tears. There was still grievance in the depths of her eyes. But it slowly began to flash with shyness and joy. Mo Ching-woo's tears finally stopped. She looked at Chuyang in a daze. Then she hugged Chuyang's neck. Her face slowly turned red, and her eyes became swollen like peaches. She bit her lips and timidly asked, "Brother Chuyang, do I look ugly now?" Chuyang shook his head vigorously. "What are you talking about? My Ching-woo is always the most beautiful at any time. Brother Chuyang can't get enough of looking at you." Mo Ching-woo felt relieved. She smiled. She gently stuck her face on Chuyang's chest, and said in a low and satisfied voice, "Brother Chuyang, I'm very happy. I'm very happy." Then she closed her eyes and listened to Chuyang's heartbeat. She felt the warm aura of Brother Chuyang's body. She curled up in his arms like a soft kitten. The corners of her mouth exposed a trace of a touching smile. Her little mouth finally curled up in happiness. "I'm not afraid at all. I'm not flustered at all. I don't have to worry at all. I don't have to feel wronged at all. Brother Chuyang is here. I don't have to worry about my things being taken away by others. I don't have to worry about being given away as a concubine. I don't have to worry about people looking down on me and abandoning me. Brother Chuyang will protect me. Definitely. Everything is fine." Chuyang's heart was peaceful and satisfied. Hugging this delicate little body, he seemed to feel that his life was finally complete. "Brother Chuyang, I'm very happy." This sentence was also silently said in his heart. "Ching-woo, I'm also very happy. I can feel that you're full of vitality in my arms. I'm very happy. I'm very happy." He thought of his previous life. Mo Ching-woo weakly snuggled in his arms and said, "Chuyang, I look better than the sword." Then he thought of today's sentence, "I'm very happy." Chuyang instantly felt that his previous life and this life were gathered together. His mind was a mess. It was strange and variegated. It was as if at this moment he had returned to the purple bamboo forest of his previous life. Then, he suddenly returned like a dream. Feeling the warm and soft body in his arms, Chuyang suddenly felt a burst of satisfaction. He silently said, Qing Wu, if there is a next life, I will dance with you under the heavens. I'm satisfied. I will definitely dance with you under the heavens. I won't have any more regrets. He lovingly lowered his head to look, and saw that Emo Qing Wu was dressed in red. Her soft hair was draped over her shoulders, and the red cloud steel butterfly was flashing on her head. She didn't have any other accessories besides this butterfly. Her long eyelashes softly stuck to her eyelids. Like a tired butterfly, she began to stopping in this warm embrace. Emo Qing Wu contentedly and happily sighed. She moved her arms that were a little sore from hugging Chu Yang. She changed her posture, squirmed a little, and hugged him tightly again. She didn't want to let go for a moment. I wrote 2,000 words for 14 hours. I deleted more than 10,000 words. The only thing I'm satisfied with is these 2,000 words. When I typed the title Brother Chu Yang, I'm so happy, my heart suddenly turned sour, and tears started to fall out of my eyes. I'm very happy. Because I wrote the feeling I wanted. Chapter 460. As the sun set in the west, rays of multicolored light shone upon the forest and the mountains, making it look like a sea of flowing light. Chu Yang carried Emo Qing Wu and walked out with a smile. It was as if he had walked out of a fairy tale. His black robe fluttered, his figure tall. Emo Qing Wu, dressed in red, lay in his arms. The sunlight on the horizon seemed to embed a layer of gold on Chu Yang and Emo Qing Wu's bodies. At least, in Emo Tianji's eyes, it was a kind of beauty that shook his soul in an instant. This feeling was so harmonious, so touching. Emo Qing Wu seemed to have grown on Chu Yang's body, and would not come down no matter what. From time to time, she would raise her head and smile at Chu Yang. After a while, she would raise her head and smile at him again. Her smile was bright and satisfied. Emo Tianji stood there, dumbfounded by what he saw. He had been waiting here for an entire afternoon, waiting anxiously. But when he saw Chu Yang finally carrying Emo Qing Wu out, he was suddenly touched at this moment. He was not in a hurry. He had never seen his little sister so happy. Such happiness and satisfaction that overflowed from the depths of her heart. Emo Tianji looked on with satisfaction. The anxiety that he had been waiting for an entire afternoon seemed to have disappeared without a trace at this moment. Brother Emo, I'm taking Emo Qing Wu away. Chu Yang looked at Emo Tianji and said solemnly. Hearing the words, Brother Emo, Emo Qing Wu raised her head in panic. She turned around and saw Emo Tianji, her second brother. Her eyes couldn't help but redden. But she bit her lip lightly and lowered her gaze. Little Wu! Emo Tianji stepped forward, his voice trembling a little. Emo Qing Wu bit her lip. After a long while, she said with difficulty, Second brother, Emo Qing Wu, do you want to go with me or Brother Chu? Emo Tianji looked at his sister with some longing. Second brother will also protect you. I'll go with Brother Chu Yang, Emo Qing Wu said without hesitation. Emo Tianji's eyes dimmed. I'm leaving. Chu Yang looked at Emo Tianji. Brother Emo, if you want to control the Emo clan, don't let go of this opportunity. Tianji agreed and then suddenly shouted. Wait a minute. After he finished speaking, he ran over and looked at Emo Qing Wu and said, Little sister, I have a question that I have always wanted to ask you, but I didn't have the chance. Can I get your answer now? What is it? Emo Qing Wu was still biting her rosy lips. The light in her eyes made Emo Tianji feel a heartache. Why did you suddenly become so estranged from your second brother? Emo Tianji said with some pain. Second brother's heart is very uncomfortable. Emo Qing Wu gritted her teeth. At this moment, it was obvious that she was using a lot of force. He looked at Emo Tianji, his second brother, with a complicated expression in his eyes. Then, he asked in a low voice, I have always wanted to ask you, second brother. Why didn't you dare to look at me on the day of the clan meeting? Emo Tianji was startled and suddenly raised his head. However, Emo Qing Wu continued to ask, At that time, why did you tell him about my saber? Emo Tianji was startled. He only felt bitterness in his heart. There were 1,000 things he wanted to say, but he could not say them. This time, my family has betrothed me. As long as I return, I will be engaged. However, you are the first to come and pick me up. And Mo Qingwu said with some anger. Second brother, don't you know what I will face when I return? And Mo Tianji felt as if he was struck by lightning. He took 3 steps back. He finally knew where he was wrong. He was wrong not to say it. He did all kinds of things but did not make it clear. These 3 things were all for Mo Qingwu's good. At that time, he did not dare to look at her because he could not bear to see his younger sister sad. However, he forgot that his younger sister was the most helpless at that moment. She needed someone to look at her and show that they were on her side. That way, she would feel much better. The appearance of the saber was to make a final effort so that his younger sister could get some care after losing her original position in the family. However, he neglected that his younger sister had nothing. At that time, that saber was all her hope and spiritual sustenance. However, he cruelly took it away. Now he came to pick her up so that he could take her away and not let her return to the family to accept that cruel fate. However, he did not say it out loud either. His younger sister thought that he was sending her back to the fire pit. Who could he blame? Could he blame his younger sister for being too sensitive? However, if it was anyone else, how could they not be sensitive in that kind of situation? How could they not be sensitive? Chu Yang sighed and said, Qingwu, your second brother truly loves and cares for you. There is absolutely no falsehood in it. He truly wants you to be well. However, your second brother's habit is to do good things but not to say it out loud. This is your second brother's shortcoming. You have to believe in your second brother. And Mo Qingwu lowered her head. Her long hair covered her face. She gently nodded. And Mo Tianji looked at Chu Yang with a strange feeling. He repeatedly thanked him. Thank you, Brother Chu. Thank you. Not saying what you did is equivalent to not doing it. Especially good things. Chu Yang casually said. Brother Mo, you did very well. However, what you said was not good. This weakness isn't good for being the patriarch of a family. And Mo Tianji deeply nodded. He seemed to be deep in thought. He was obviously much stronger than Mo Tianyun. However, there were still many people in the family who supported Mo Tianyun. Ultimately, there was one thing: Mo Tianyun knew how to talk and win people's hearts. However, Mo Tianji had neglected this aspect. Although there were many hardcore supporters by his side, their numbers were far inferior. That was why he was at a disadvantage. Understanding this, Mo Tianji's heart suddenly became clear. Instead of acting, it was better to speak. This kind of understanding was inevitably a little cruel to people. It was unpleasant to hear, but it was the truth. After thinking this through, he was about to thank Chu Yang. However, when he turned around, he realized that Chu Yang had already carried Dian Qingwu a few hundred feet away. He hurriedly shouted, Brother Chu, little Wu, as long as I have time, I will go back to see you. And Mo Qingwu raised her head from Chu Yang's embrace. Her gaze leaped over Chu Yang's shoulder. She saw her second brother standing there waving his hand vigorously. His eyes were full of reluctance. She couldn't help but feel moved. She stretched out her small hand from Chu Yang's shoulder and gently waved a few times. And Mo Tianji's face was instantly full of smiles. Thank you, little sister. And Mo Qingwu's face bloomed into a smile. Then she hid her head in Chu Yang's embrace again. And Mo Tianji relaxed and let out a sigh of relief. He relaxed and smiled. Then, he gently waved the purple jade flute in his hand and placed it on the flute. A whining sound of the flute suddenly floated in the forest. And Mo Qingwu listened to her second brother's flute music. She was in Brother Chu Yang's embrace. Suddenly, she felt as if she was floating in the clouds. Among all the women in the world, there was no one else who could be happier than her. The next day, the sky seemed to brighten exceptionally early. And Mo Qingwu woke up early and ran happily into Chu Yang's room. When she saw Chu Yang lying on the bed, she couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. It turned out that she was afraid that she was dreaming yesterday. She immediately covered her small nose with her hand and said, "It's so smelly. Brother Chu Ying's feet are so smelly." She rushed to the door and breathed in a few breaths of air. However, she couldn't bear to leave. She could only stay at the door and squat on the threshold. Smelly? Chu Yang was a little depressed. He really did wash his feet last night before going to bed. Sigh, his feet were like this. Even if he washed them 10 times in one night, there would still be a smell tomorrow morning. He remembered that Mo Qingwu's only dissatisfaction with him in his previous life was the smell of his feet. He couldn't help but smile. He rolled up and shook his body. Instantly, the room was filled with a fragrant smell. Mo Qingwu covered her nose and ran away. "Brother Chu Yang, what are you shaking for? It's so smelly." Chu Yang laughed loudly. The great clans were already waiting for the battle. The bet was already over. They were only waiting for the opening of the battle. The huge venue was empty. There was actually a sea of people around. There were no empty seats. The best view was in the middle. It was the territory of the dark bamboo. It occupied a huge area. On both sides were the teams of the great clans. Then, there were even more scattered people who were waiting for this big battle. Dong Wushang and the other clans were in the south. All the clans on Gaoxing's side were in the back. The 4 great clans in charge of the bet were naturally closest to the 2 sides. They were observing the outcome of the battle. Everyone's hearts were in their mouths. This wasn't just a bet. It also involved one's personal wealth. Once Chu Yang and Duqiu bet 800 million, the odds for Gaoxing were immediately pushed down to 1 to 1. There were even more people who bet on Gaoxing. In just one day, there was an additional 100 million. If this money was before, Mo Tianyun and the others would definitely be grinning from ear to ear. But now, the 4 of them could only sigh. It was just a drizzle. The sound of drums shook the heavens and the earth. The battle was about to begin. The master of ceremonies was already standing in the middle. He raised his voice and shouted, "Everyone! Silence!" It would have been better if he didn't say silence. Once he did, countless people started to clamor at once. "Wife snatching! Wife snatching!" Many people shouted at the same time. They were in high spirits. "Wife, wife, wife snatching wife!" More people shouted together. "A wool wife!" Luo Kudi's strange cry resounded through the sky. GMO angrily slapped his head. "What are you shouting for? That's my wife!" Luo Kudi smiled mischievously and said, "Who are we? Your wife is my wife!" GMO kicked him. Luo Kudi screamed strangely as he rolled in the air like a rubber ball. At this moment, a tall and sturdy figure suddenly jumped down from the spectators' stand. He landed on the stage. He raised his hand and shouted like a thunderbolt. "Wait! I have something to say!" Everyone looked over. They saw that this person had big shoulders and a round waist. He was tall and sturdy. His arms were big enough for a person to stand on. His buttocks were big enough for a horse to run. What an imposing and boorish man! However, this man's chest was bulging and his buttocks were perky. It turned out that he was a woman. This was the biggest bet of this competition. Huyen Albua and Miss Huyen had appeared. Chapter 461. "Everyone!" Huyen Albua shouted. She cupped her fists and bowed. This action was extremely heroic. If it was a man doing it, it would definitely be awe-inspiring. But now that she was doing it, cough cough, she was also awe-inspiring. Jimo's eyes lit up. He grabbed Chu Yang's arm and said, "Boss, this is my wife. Look, she's extremely charming." Upon hearing the words extremely amorous, Chu Yang only felt dizzy. The world was spinning, and even his feet were trembling. He sat down on Mo Qingwu's body. Mo Qingwu laughed and hugged him. She looked through the gap in Chu Yang's arm and saw the awe-inspiring Huyen Albua. She couldn't help but exclaim, "This uncle is really tall and sturdy." Luo Kudi suddenly burst into laughter. Dong Wushang and Gu Duxing also couldn't help but laugh. Even Ji Zhu and Dong Wulei were swaying back and forth. Ji Mo's face turned bitter. My little grandaunt, look carefully. Is that uncle? That's sister-in-law, okay. Sister-in-law? And Mo Qingwu was obedient, and didn't say anything else. She looked at GMO with a questioning gaze, especially when she looked at GMO's eyes. She seemed to have discovered something. She nodded very seriously and whispered in Chu Yang's ear. Brother GMO's eyes are small, no wonder. Chu Yang's body trembled. On the other side, Gao Xing's face was as black as charcoal. Everyone. As you all know, this battle is for me. Huyan Aobo exhaled and said majestically, I am Huyan Aobo, Gao Xing's fiancé. We have been engaged since childhood. It's the order of the clan. Everyone gradually quieted down and listened to this woman speak. But Gao Xing doesn't like me. In order to avoid this marriage, he even ran away from home and went to the lower three heavens. Huyan Aobo said indifferently, I look different from ordinary women. I, Huyan Aobo, understand that he doesn't like me. After all, everyone wanted their woman to have a beautiful figure, and to be lovable and charming. I admit that I'm not good-looking. Huyan Aobo said loudly. Because I'm not good-looking, it's understandable that Gao Xing ran away from the marriage. I won't blame him. She wouldn't hate him. If I were a man, I wouldn't want a wife like her. Don't you all agree? Huyan Aobo roared. However, no one replied. Seeing this woman speak, everyone suddenly felt their hearts sink. That's why I don't have much hope for my marriage. That was until I met the second son of the Ji family, GMO. He didn't abandon me and I fell in love with him. I immediately returned home and asked my family to cancel my engagement with the Gao family. Huyan Aobo said loudly, I originally thought that this matter would be a matter of course. Because Gao Xing ran away in order to escape the marriage. Would he want to marry me? Annulling the engagement should have been a matter of course. But who would have thought that Gao Xing would immediately say that GMO had snatched his wife away from him? He couldn't bear the humiliation and wanted to fight GMO. This is also the origin of this matter. Huyan Aobo laughed. How laughable is this matter? This matter is getting bigger and bigger. Now, the 8 great clans are getting involved. Tens of thousands of heroes are waiting in anticipation. Huyan Aobo laughed mockingly and said, Gao Xing, you are so generous. Gao Xing sat with an ashen face. He cursed in a low voice. Bitch. Huyan Aobo laughed heartily. Then, she suddenly turned around and looked in Gao Xing's direction. She said in a loud voice, Gao Xing, since you said that GMO had snatched away your lover, and didn't hesitate to create such a huge battle, I presume that you like me very much? Then, as long as you agree, I will marry you right now. Are you willing to be your wife? Do you dare to marry me? Gao Xing's face suddenly turned pale. Looking at Huyan Aobo's tall and sturdy body, he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva with difficulty. Gao Xing, are you willing or not? Huyan Aobo laughed loudly. Say something. Gao Xing finally couldn't bear it, and said angrily, You have already hooked up with GMO. How can I still want you to be my wife? As soon as these words came out, the large field was filled with boos. If you don't want to marry her, why are you fighting? Is it fun to fight? Someone said loudly. Haha, this is ridiculous. Fighting for a woman, but not willing to marry her. Young Master Gao is indeed unique. Someone ridiculed. He just wants to get some compensation. In young Master Gao's heart, it's good that such a woman has left. But if he can use such a woman to gain something, then he will gain both fame and fortune. Moreover, he will show the image of a century later in front of the heroes of the world. It's really pitiful. Someone laughed loudly. Huyan Aobo looked coldly at Gao Xing. Suddenly she burst into laughter and said, That's all I want to say. All right, everyone, I'm done. Those who should be beaten, fight, and those who should be watched, watch. Although I, Huyan Aobo, am not good-looking, I don't want to be called a fickle woman. I just want to say these few words. That's all. Miss Huyan, you are a good woman who dares to love and hate. A big man suddenly stood up and laughed. If I didn't already have a wife, I would definitely fight young Master GMO to death today. Ha 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 ha. Everyone applauded like thunder. GMO's head was full of black lines. He muttered, "This woman, really? She attracted so many love rivals with just a few words. What should I do?" As he said this, his face was full of worry. Sun Wushang, Gu Duxing, and Luo Kudi rolled their eyes and looked at the sky. They thought, "This guy is crazy." We also admire Huyen Aobo's temper and character. But to marry her as a wife, we should politely decline. Mo Qingya's eyes were shining. She pulled Chu Yang's arm and whispered, "This sister's ears are so lovely." GMO on the side immediately said, Yes, her figure is also very good. Think about it. With such a wife, she can shelter you from the wind and rain. How safe would that be?" Chu Zhang painfully closed his eyes. He had the urge to tear GMO into pieces. Fortunately, the competition had begun. The Master of Ceremonies announced loudly, "Competition of the 7 great clans. First round, Dong Wushang against Li Xiongtu." Sun Wushang suddenly stood up. He stretched out his hand, and the pitch-black cloak on his body fluttered to the ground. His tall and majestic figure was revealed. His black saber stood erect behind his shoulder. He walked down step by step. Halfway down, he suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. His voice was like thunder, and rumbled in all directions. "Li Xiongtu, you can give up now, and let Tu Qianhao come up. It's not too late. I'm afraid you won't have time to regret if my saber attacks you." Li Xiongtu's tall and sturdy body suddenly stood up. His eyes were filled with a strong desire to fight. He laughed and said, "Dong Wushang, are you afraid?" Sun Wushang's eyes flashed, and he said, "Very good." Both of them were thousands of feet away from each other. They looked at each other. They felt a heroic and majestic aura pressing down on them. Their desire to win was aroused, and they suddenly laughed at the same time. Chapter 462. Two equally burly figures swept down from the stands at almost the same time, one on the left and one on the right. They flew towards the center of the arena. Although there were only 2 people, they seemed insignificant in such a grand arena. However, the people on the left clearly felt a huge mountain pressing down on them. The people on the right felt as if the earth trembled under this power. Dong Wushang's domineering aura soared to the heavens. Li Xiongtu's heroic aura was unparalleled. These 2 people had met in the first round. It could be said that they were evenly matched. Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. He opened his eyes wide. The 2 most domineering people among the 12 future influential people were finally facing each other here. Chu Yan had some expectations for this battle. From this battle, he could completely see the direction of development of these 2 people. Because these 2 future influential people had now begun to shape their life's achievements. Dong Wushang's falling body suddenly let out a long roar. He stretched his hand back and pulled out the black saber in midair. This action of pulling out the saber immediately made the surrounding people boil with a boom. Because of his burly figure, he gave people a feeling of being as immovable as a mountain even when he was flying. His right hand, which was stretched back, moved very slowly. Everyone could see it clearly. But it was precisely this slow movement that left behind an extremely clear welcome. The procedure of this saber was very clear. Hand raised, finger pointed to the sky, hand over the shoulder, and hand holding the saber. Every action was clearly seen. It made people's vision and feelings seriously conflicted. It was extremely uncomfortable but also extremely mysterious. Then, a long rainbow-like saber light shot out from his saber. Following the motion of pulling out the saber, a black light was emitted. Dong Wushang's body suddenly changed the direction of his fall. Together with his saber, he turned into a long black rainbow and flew across the sky violently. He rushed towards Li Xiongtu. He changed direction halfway, but the speed of this jump was much faster than the speed of his fall. The saber light was like a black dragon cutting through the air. It actually made a thunderous sound, The sleeves of his sleeves streaked through the air, and it actually emitted a loud crashing sound. On the opposite side, Li Xiongtu let out a wild shout at the same time Dong Wushang changed his move. His body rolled, and a dazzling sword light suddenly appeared. The sword aura was as thick as a drum, and its whole body was emitting a bright and dazzling light. Like the tail of a meteor in the sky, it also changed direction in the air and madly rushed toward Dong Wushang. The two of them had unexpectedly adopted the same strategy. The first strike was to be as powerful as a thunderbolt, giving the other party a heavy blow. He heaved a sigh of relief and said in a soft voice, "Wushang has won this round." Gu Duxing and GMO turned to look at him. In the arena, the two of them approached each other like lightning. They were already in the sky above the arena. Dong Wushang's eyes shone with an intense desire to fight. He shouted, "Slash!" His voice was like a thunderclap, and his saber was like a thunderbolt. With a ferocious aura that could cut through a mountain range, his saber chopped down. Li Xiongtu didn't utter a single word as he rushed over. The sword light was blazing. Boom! The two men's majestic bodies collided with each other in midair. The saber and the saber intersected. Their four legs were also rapidly moving like butterflies. In an instant, they had exchanged 13 saber moves, 13 sword moves, and 13 legs. With a loud bang, a wave of air rolled out and spread in all directions. Dong Wushang let out a long shout, and his black hair suddenly fluttered in the air. He somersaulted twice in midair, and was shaken to retreat. On the opposite side, Li Xiongtu let out a muffled groan. His beard fluttered, and he made the same move as Dong Wushang. He somersaulted in midair, and retreated 30 feet. The two of them were about to land on the ground at the same time. Dong Wushang pointed his black saber downwards, and the tip of the saber touched the ground. Dong Wushang's body, which was about to land on the ground, bounced up like a bullet. The saber light turned into a rainbow, and shot straight toward Li Xiongtu's day. The curly beard on Li Xiongtu's face exploded. The tip of the beard touched the ground, and bounced up. His entire body bounced up into midair, and suddenly fell down. The sword light actually turned into a dazzling snow-white disk, and went to meet Dong Wushang's attack. Dong Wushang's eyes flashed. His left hand was suddenly behind his back, and his right arm held the saber. The tip of the saber was slightly raised, and his body in midair changed into an even more forward-leaning posture. Following the violent momentum, the saber ruthlessly chopped on the sword-light disc. The violence of this saber made the onlookers feel like closing their eyes, and couldn't bear to watch. A loud clang. The disc-like sword light suddenly became somewhat scattered. Dong Wushang's second saber fell down. Another loud sound rang out. Dong Wushang's right arm danced like a whirlwind. The heavy black saber was like a thunderbolt, violently falling down, lifting up, and falling down again, barbaric. Yes, Dong Wushang's fighting style was extremely barbaric. Completely unreasonable. Under such barbaric attacks, no matter what kind of fancy moves, no matter what kind of moves, it was useless. What borrowing strength to fight strength, or what kind of tricks were all just nonsense. Unless you could block his attacks, and hold on until the moment the two of them separated, otherwise you would only be reduced to dregs by his extremely barbaric attacks. Clang, 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 the sound of iron being hammered rang out continuously. Li Xiongtu was suffering unspeakably. He had always been known for his great strength, and his hands were also made of specially made star iron. It weighed more than 50 kilograms, and if it were anyone else, they wouldn't be able to use it. But when facing Dong Wushang, he felt that the strength that he was so proud of actually paled in comparison to the other party. The other party's barbaric, violent, and completely unreasonable fighting style made Li Xiongyin, who had the same style, feel aggrieved. In the past, those who fought with Li Xiongtu would all feel this. But now, it was finally his turn to bear it. Dong Wushang's face was cold and expressionless, and his attacks were like a storm. The bodies of the two people kept falling, and in the process of falling, they kept colliding. Dong Wushang actually didn't have any fancy moves, and without the slightest bit of skill, he chopped out 10 times in a row. The two people had already landed on the ground, and with a loud bang, the saber and sword clashed. Dust and dirt flew up with a bang. Tens of thousands of people around felt their eardrums explode at the same time. Dong Wushang stood still, his long saber pointed forward. His eyes were cold and sharp, and he was as expressionless as steel, like an eagle. Li Xiongtu's body flew out like a cannonball with his long sword in hand. His feet landed on the ground and he flew for 70 to 80 feet before he landed on the ground with a puff sound. Then, he suddenly bounced up and spun in the air before he stood firmly on the ground. His face turned dark red for a moment before it turned pale. He raised his head and looked at Dong Wushang, his eyes already full of seriousness. He had actually already suffered internal injuries in this violent exchange of attacks. He didn't expect that this Dong Wushang, who was 4 or 5 years younger than him, actually had the strength to defeat him, and even kill him. This violent attack made everyone watching the fight hold their breath, and their hearts almost jumped out of their throats. Too violent. Too satisfying. This fighting style was too hooligan. Chu Yang watched the two people fight with rapt attention, and completely relaxed. Dong Wushang was definitely going to win this round. His strength and strength were not much different from Li Xiongtu's, and their spiritual power was also evenly matched. But Dong Wushang's advantage was that he could fight. He dared to fight. Moreover, Dong Wushang's aura was fierce and indomitable. Although Li Xiongtu's aura was domineering, he didn't have Dong Wushang's reckless spirit. The most important thing was, Dong Wushang's saber was more than 5 times the length of his opponent's sword. To tell the truth, Li Xiongtu's sword was still intact, and this was already very surprising to Chu Yang. The two people in the field looked at each other, and each roared loudly. Then, they rushed up and fought again. Du Xing, if you weren't injured, how would you deal with him? Chu Yang asked Gu Du Xing. As soon as he relaxed, Chu Yang immediately used this opportunity to teach Gu Du Xing and the others a lesson. This was a rare learning opportunity. Gu Du Xing, GMO, and Luo Kudi all turned their ears at the same time. Gu Du Xing smiled. My style is different from Li Xiongtu's. If I were to fight Wushang, I would launch intensive attacks from the beginning, and would never compete with him in strength. I would use the speed of my body movement to restrain his unparalleled strength. I would drag it out until his aura was exhausted, and that would be when he would be defeated. Chu Yang nodded and said, This method of yours can be used to deal with others. For example, against Li Xiongtu, it would be easy. But against Wushang, you would need to expend several times more energy. Why? Gu Du Xing didn't understand. Dong Wushang's saber is heavy. Heavy is an advantage. And it's not just a little heavy, it's too heavy. It's not easy to grasp its weight, but once it's grasped, it will form a kind of inertia. This kind of inertia only needs to be slightly manipulated to be able to unleash the full power of the saber itself. This is the advantage of heavy weapons. Chu Yang smiled. So you see that Wushang is using all his strength in every move, but in fact, he isn't using much energy. And if you continue fighting like this, he will become braver and braver. And faster. So, if you have the idea of wasting his energy, the final result will be that both of you are powerless, or both of you will be injured. Your injuries will be lighter, and his injuries will be heavier. This is the difference. If it's a life and death battle, you will be heavily injured, and he will die, Chu Yang said. And among the experts of the same level, perhaps only you, Gu Du Xing, can achieve such an outcome. Gu Du Xing was deep in thought. The best way to deal with Dong Wushang's fighting style is, don't let him go crazy and get excited. Suppress him right from the start. Then you will be able to end the battle very quickly, Chu Yang said. How can you suppress him right from the start? Gu Du Xing frowned and thought hard. Suddenly his eyes lit up. Dong Wushang's strength lies in his saber. So if you make use of your body movement to deal with his wrist before his attack reaches its peak, you will be able to deal with his wrist first. The wrist holding the saber is his Achilles heel. Yes. Chu Yang nodded. But just like now, even if Li Xiongtu thinks of this, it's already useless. Because Dong Wushang's aura has already reached its peak, and Li Xiongtu's aura has already been reduced by half. Chapter 463. Dong Wushang and Gu Duxing were completely different. If Gu Duxing was a natural swordsman, then Dong Wushang was undoubtedly a natural warrior. A dashing warrior. Chu Yang nodded and looked at the opposite side. He saw that some people were whispering to each other. They seemed somewhat anxious. Obviously, they hadn't expected that Dong Wushang would be so powerful. Dong Wushang's reputation had risen during this time. But he was still a few years younger than Li Xiongtu's day. Who would have thought that Dong Wushang would be able to firmly suppress Li Xiongtu? Especially the gamblers. Each of them opened their eyes wide. They were so nervous that they didn't dare to breathe. However, a few people had gathered together, and were whispering to each other. They were the leaders of the Gao clan, Li clan, and Tu clan. They were looking at the scene with dignified expressions. Chu Yang's eyes flashed. He thought, so, that's how it is. They want to take advantage of this competition. They want to form an alliance regardless of whether they win or lose. Presumably, this is the real intention of the Gao clan to provoke this decisive battle. It doesn't matter whether Dong Wushang wins or loses. The Dong clan and the Li clan are facing each other. These two clans are both colossi. So, the conflict between them will become more and more intense. Having a powerful ally in this situation is like sending charcoal in the snow. Jun Shizhu gently sighed on the other side. She said, Li Xiongtu lost. Duke Yu stood beside her with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at the scene without blinking. He slowly nodded and said, But both of them have great potential. Jun Shizhu thought for a moment and said, Dong Wushang should be stronger. Duke Yu said, Li Xiongtu made a strategic mistake. Li Xiongtu may not necessarily lose if he were to face Dong Wushang again. But Dong Wushang is 5 years younger than Li Xiongtu's day. Jun Shizhu said, You only look at the fighting strength. You don't think about this. But this is a very important factor. Moreover, you must pay attention to one thing. Dong Wushang started to improve rapidly after he met Chu Yang. In other words, he was far inferior to Li Xiongtu's day. He only used a little more than a year to defeat him. This is the key point. Jun Shizhu sighed and said, I'm suddenly very interested in this king of Hell Chu. Duke Yu nodded lightly and said, He is indeed a strange person. Moreover, its potential has reached a frightening level. Jun Shizhu's eyes lit up as she said, Frightening? She pondered for a moment, and then said, Do you want to go and take a look? Duke Wei replied, All right. Then, his figure suddenly distorted, and disappeared from Jun Shizhu's side. Jun Shizhu's eyes flashed. She then faintly whispered, Little Wei's otherworldly phantom technique has strengthened a lot. Could it be that he received some kind of stimulation and progressed? Jun Lulu faintly smiled. Her eyes flashed with a proud brilliance. When Duke Yu came to Chu Yang's side, he saw Mo Qingwu sitting in Chu Yang's arms. She was happily peeling an orange, and stuffed a piece of the fruit into Chu Yang's mouth. Then she stuffed the other piece into her own mouth. She puffed up her cheeks, and asked in a delicate and sweet voice, Is it sweet? Chu Yang moaned in satisfaction and said, It's too sweet. After Xiao Wu's hands, it's indeed sweeter. Hee hee. And Mo Qingwu smiled with satisfaction. Then, eat another petal. It's so sweet that you'll die. Then, she tore another piece, and stuffed it into his mouth. Chu Yang chewed the orange, and listened to this sweet sound. Suddenly, he felt absent-minded, and a name emerged in the bottom of his heart, Little Tian Tian. He couldn't help but sigh softly. The space beside him distorted, and Duke Yu appeared beside him. He said, So cool. Chu Yang snorted and said, Are your injuries healed? Duke Yu snorted. He sat on the seat beside Chu Yang that Mo Qingwu had vacated and said, "Your injuries also healed very quickly." "Same here." Chu Yang blinked. A chaotic sound of metal clashing resounded in the field. Dong Wushang's loud shouts were getting more and more majestic. Li Xiongtu roared wildly, and did his best to counterattack. It was only a fight between two people. However, these two people had fought with a fierce and desperate aura of a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses. Dong Wushang roared loudly. The saber light and the sword shadow fiercely clashed together. Chu Yang closed his eyes and sighed. Li Xiongtu lost. Dookie nodded. In the field, the saber light and the sword shadow faded away. Dong Wushang stood upright in the field, and blood flowed from his shoulder like a waterfall. Li Xiongtu staggered backward. There was a line of blood on his forehead, and a terrifying saber wound on his chest. He retreated more than 100 feet, and was about to fall down. He hurriedly used his long sword to support himself on the ground. With a snap, the long sword broke. This sword had already clashed with Dong Wushang's black saber hundreds of times. It couldn't bear the heavy burden, and was full of scars. The moment he supported himself on the ground, it broke immediately. Li Xiongtu staggered, and sat on the ground. He roared and gasped for breath. Suddenly, he laughed bitterly, and roared towards the sky. "Satisfying," he continued. "I've lost." Dong Wushang was expressionless. He held his saber and bowed. Then, he turned around and left. Li Xiongtu shouted, "Dong Wushang, I'll look for you again. I don't need you to show mercy." Dong Wushang didn't even turn his head. He said, "Next time, I'll kill you." Li Xiongtu laughed heroically, and said loudly, "Motherfucker, it's fine if I've lost, but I've actually been sold a favor for not killing me. I've really suffered a great loss today." He turned his head and looked at the MC fiercely. "Why aren't you announcing the result? Motherfucker, is it satisfying to sit here in a sorry state?" The MC was shocked. He hurriedly said loudly, "The first round of the competition between the 7 great clans, Dong Wushang vs. Li Xiong Tuesday, Dong Wushang wins." After he finished speaking, he hurriedly helped Li Xiongtu up, and helped him down. Li Xiongtu didn't have any strength in his body, but he laughed as he walked. He shouted repeatedly, "Satisfying! It's satisfying to fight like this!" Dookie said, "How was it?" Chu Yang naturally understood what he meant. He said, "Very good." Dong Wushang's victory was already expected. But Li Xiongtu didn't lose his fighting spirit even though he lost. "It's very rare." Dookie smiled. "You really understood what I meant. An ordinary person would have thought that Li Xiongtu would have lost if he fought Dong Wushang again after this defeat. But they would have overlooked the firmness of Li Xiongtu's heart of martial arts. This defeat, especially in the hands of Dong Wushang, who has a similar style of fighting style, is a good thing for him." Chu Yang nodded. How can one of the 12 influential figures of the future of the 3 heavens lose his fighting spirit so easily? Ao Xia Yun, Xia Dan Qiong, and O Du shall look solemn in another direction. Ao Xia Yun softly sighed and said, "How was it?" Xia Dan Qiong bitterly smiled in shame. "I'm afraid that I would have had no choice but to throw out the viburnum flower if I had fought against Dong Wushang. The consequence would have been that I would have died, and he would have been seriously injured. It would have been equivalent to my defeat." O Du Shao nodded in agreement and said, "I could have killed him, but I would have had to use poison. But it's also possible that I wouldn't have had enough time to use the poison, and would have been cut down by his saber. I don't have any assurance that I would have been able to use the poison technique in the face of such an attack." Ao Xia Yun nodded. Dong Wushang has truly stepped into the top ranks after this fight. He pondered for a moment and said, "I'm afraid that I would have had to pay a great price if I had fought against Dong Wushang. I didn't expect that Dong Wushang would have become so dreadful." Dong Wushang returned with large strides, and was greeted with a bear hug from Luo Kudi. The second fight. Gao Liang of the Gao clan will fight against Luo Kawu of the Luo clan. The voice of the master of ceremonies came from afar. Luo Kuwu laughed out loud. He looked at Luo Kudi apologetically. Then, he stood up and walked down step by step. Gao Liang is the external younger brother of the Gao clan. He used to be a servant of the Gao clan. But the clan saw that Gao Liang's aptitude was extraordinary. So, the clan bestowed him with the surname Gao, and trained him vigorously. He should be a first-grade sword king at present. He's 32 years old. Luo Kudi's complexion was solemn as he said, I'm afraid that my elder brother may lose this fight. Chu Yang narrowed his eyes, and looked at the two people walking towards the stage. He sighed and said, It's not that he may lose, but he's bound to lose. Luo Kudi, your elder brother, doesn't have a fighting spirit. If he really wanted to fight, it was still possible for him to fight until both sides suffered heavy losses. But the problem is, he doesn't want to fight this fight. Luo Kudi sighed and drooped his head. He knew his elder brother's thoughts. He wasn't a legitimate son, and couldn't threaten his elder brother's position. So, he had always had a good relationship with his elder brother. But the problem was that he didn't get the clan's acknowledgement for this matter. It was already very good that his elder brother had come. Moreover, there was another reason. Luo Kuwu had once received Gao Liang's favor. The other party had deliberately arranged the two of them for this fight. They must have seen this point. Even if Luo Kuwu could win, it would only be a draw. What's more, he couldn't win. Chu Yan had already thought of this point. He said, It's okay. We only need 4 wins out of 7. That's enough. Sure enough, Luo Kuwu lost by a single move as expected. The next fight was between Ji Zhu and Gao Meng. Gao Meng was the second duke of the Gao clan. He wasn't a legitimate son either, but he was a martial arts genius. Ji Zhu entered the stage, and the two of them fought fiercely. In the end, both of them didn't have any strength left, and could only shake hands and make peace. 1 win, 1 loss, and 1 draw. What a pity. Duke Yu shook his head and sighed. Meanwhile, Jun Shizhu, who was watching the fight on the other side, also said, What a pity. Duke Yu saw that Chu Yang had turned his head to look at him. So, he said, Jizhu could have won. But the great dream divine technique he's practicing has reached a bottleneck. And it's time for him to make a breakthrough. He'll have to wait for the next opportunity if he gets injured. Jizhu can't afford to wait. So, he can only end the fight peacefully. Great dream divine technique? Chu Yang smiled. No wonder he's so lazy. It turns out that he's practicing this kind of lazy technique. Duke Yu smiled and said, In fact, you can help him make a breakthrough as soon as possible. Chu Yang curled his lips and said, I don't have that ability. Duke Yu smiled meaningfully. The 4th fight. Tu Wanqing against Dong Wulei. Dong Wushang's complexion changed. He said, I admit defeat in this fight. Tu Wanqing was a king-level expert of the previous generation of the Tu clan. He had always been vicious and merciless. Even Dong Wushang wouldn't necessarily be able to win against Tu Wanqing, let alone Dong Wulei. It was obvious that Tu Qianhao was bullying people in this fight. Chu Yang's side had 1 win, 2 losses, and 1 draw after Dong Wulei had admitted defeat. Chu Yang was at a disadvantage. Everyone who had bet on Gao Xing to win was grinning from ear to ear. The 5th fight. Tu Clan's representative is Tu Qianhao. Against Gu Clan's Gu Du Xing. The atmosphere of the entire arena exploded along with these words. Many people had bet on Gu Du Xing's injury. It could be said that this fight was the key. There was basically no need to compete if Gu Du Xing lost. But Gu Du Xing's injury wasn't a secret. How could he defeat Tu Qianhao, who was at the same level as him, while he was seriously injured? Chapter 464. Gu Du Xing stood up with a swoosh sound. His stature was as straight as a sword. He walked down with an indomitable sharpness. Suddenly, a sword intent surged in the air. However, people with high cultivations could faintly see that Gu Du Xing's complexion was somewhat pale. It seemed that he was seriously injured and hadn't recovered yet. They couldn't help but sigh inwardly. It seems that Gu Duxing won't have much luck in this match. A sharp light flashed in Tu Qianhao's eyes. He then burst into loud laughter. Brother Gu, you and I are facing each other again today. Gu Duxing faintly smiled and said, Yes, Brother Tu has been preparing for this match for a long time. I can't bear to disappoint you, Brother Tuesday. A trace of embarrassment flashed in Tu Qianhao's eyes. He then smiled and said, Brother Gu is indeed free and easy. I'm afraid that I won't be able to hold back in this match. Please forgive me if I injure Brother Gu. Dong Wushang exposed an angry look in his eyes. He then said from behind Gu Duxing, Second brother, kill him! Kill this son of a bitch! Gu Duxing slightly nodded. He then raised his voice and said, I'll be embarrassed if I injure Brother Tuesday. Suddenly, his figure flashed, and he flew down. It seemed as if a sword had been thrown out of his hand. His sleeves fluttered in the wind. His gaze was sharp. Each and every move of his was filled with a sharp sword intent. Everyone's spirit was lifted. Tu Qianhao also flew down. The two of them were old rivals. They had fought many times in the past year. Gu Duxing had been no match for Tu Qianhao in the beginning. However, he was now on par with Tu Qianhao. Moreover, Gu Duxing's reputation had soared all the way. In fact, he was now faintly on par with the number one Gong Ao Xie Yun. All of this had raised an intense murderous intention in Tu Qianhao's heart. Tu Qianhao wanted to take advantage of Gu Duxing's injury to cripple him in one fell swoop. And the purpose of his participation in this match was Gu Duxing. Tu Qianhao looked at Gu Duxing on the opposite side with rapt attention. His opponent's face was pale. He couldn't help but rejoice in his heart. Mo Tianyun's information was correct. This guy's injury isn't light. The eyes of Dukyu and Jun Shizhu on the other side flashed with a playful look. Dukyu smiled and said, King of Hell Chu, do you want to kill Tu Qianhao? Chu Yang smiled faintly. A murderous look flashed across his eyes as he said, If he wants to take advantage of me, then he must be prepared to go for wool and come home shorn. Dukyu laughed mischievously. Kill him? Chu Yang spread out his hands indifferently. This depends on Duxing's intentions. Killing sometimes required skills and methods. For example, how to clear your name after killing someone. At this time, the two people on the field had already drawn their swords. Most of the gamblers who had bet on Gao Xing were beaming with joy. He seemed to see the banknotes flying into his pocket. On the high platform, Ao Xian sighed and said, It would be too unfair if Gu Duxing were to lose because of his injuries. What a pity for this lone traveler. Therefore, he could naturally see what Tu Qianhao wanted to do with a single glance. Then, he frowned and asked, Have you arranged for the people who are ready? Xie Danqiong smiled confidently. Of course. Well, we must act immediately no matter who wins or loses. We must gather those poor bastards who have lost their family's fortune. Then, our three clans will divide the spoils equally. Don't let Mo Tianyun take advantage of us, Ao Xian said. Well, I'm afraid that Gao clan also has this idea. We can only snatch a part of it at most. Du Shao was somewhat annoyed. I'm afraid that our three clans would have been destroyed tomorrow if we had snatched all of it. Ao Xian faintly smiled. We must maintain a balance at all times. The two people gently nodded and said with a smile, Gao Xing has pulled together a small alliance in this gambling match. But they didn't expect that they would also form an alliance with their opponents. Moreover, our three clans will advance and retreat together because of this matter. Our interests are intertwined. Swift and fierce sword energy crazily burst forth. The two people on the field had already started to fight. Two groups of sword light flashed at the same time as they started to fight. Then they spread out. Unexpectedly, no one could see their figures. Gu Duxing's sword light also gave people a feeling of loneliness and arrogance. On the other hand, Tu Qianhao's sword light had a swift and fierce murderous aura. No one knew that the two people on the field were talking in a low voice while they were fighting. Gu Duxing, you're dead today! Tu Qianhao crazily brandished his sword. His face exposed a pleased smile. Blame yourself for being in the limelight! Gu Duxing coldly snorted. It's not certain who will die! A loud clang sound was heard as Tu Qianhao fiercely blocked with his sword. Gu Duxing's body staggered, and he retreated a few steps. His face flushed red. A long sword was a light and agile weapon. So, it would never appear in a fight between experts unless it was a special sword like Li Xiongtu's. However, Tu Qianhao was very proud of himself at the moment. So, he wanted to use such a method to humiliate the seriously injured Gu Duxing. Everyone sighed as they saw Gu Duxing's situation. It seems that this genius of the Gu clan, the leading figure of the younger generation, is going to fall in such a sullen manner in this competition? Tu Qianhao was in high spirits. He was going all out with every move he made. He would roar every time he brandished his sword. He seemed quite heroic. He had a bit of Dong Wushang style. However, Dong Wushang gave people the impression that he was mighty and overbearing. So, Tu Qianhao gave people the impression that he was a petty person intoxicated by success. Gu Duxing retreated step by step. His body would violently sway every time he received a sword attack. He would then retreat a few steps. His pale face had turned red, and his forehead seemed to be dripping with sweat. Tu Qianhao became even more high-spirited. No one could see it except for a few observant people. Gu Duxing's every parry seemed to be very difficult. He was at a complete disadvantage. However, his body would sway back, and he would consume Tu Qianhao's attacks. However, Tu Qianhao was able to withstand Gu Duxing's rebounding force. That was because he hadn't retreated a single step. His imposing aura was like a rainbow. Tu Qianhao's consumption of spiritual power was far greater than Gu Duxing's under such circumstances. Tu Qianhao wouldn't have been so foolish in normal circumstances. However, he didn't care about this consumption at this moment. That was because defeating Gu Duxing in this manner in front of all the heroes of the world was the most supreme glory. His reputation would surpass Ao Xianyun's in one fell swoop as long as Gu Duxing was defeated today. And he would become the #1 person of the younger generation. The reason was very simple. Gu Duxing and Ao Xianyun, these two were equally famous. The sound of impact continued to resound. Gu Duxing had already retreated around the big platform in a crooked manner. Tu Qianhao was also somewhat out of breath. However, Gu Duxing was still swaying on the opposite side. But he didn't fall down. Tu Qianhao was furious in his heart. This bastard is still stubbornly holding on for what? The anger in his heart rose, and he exerted even more strength. He sent out 18 sword attacks in a row. Then Tu Qianhao suddenly realized that Gu Duxing had raised his face, and was faintly smiling at him. His smile was full of ridicule. He was looking at Tu Qianhao as if he was looking at an idiot. Tu Qianhao's heart moved. He instinctively sensed that something was wrong. You're really stupid. How did a person like you become the Grand Duke of the Tu clan? Gu Duxing whispered. The Mo clan and my Gu clan have always been allies. You stepped into such a trap. It's really making me feel embarrassed. Tu Qianhao was startled. His mind suddenly went blank. Trap? Mo Tianyun framed me? But his 10th sword attack had already fiercely chopped down. Gu Duxing let out a long and loud shout under the watchful eyes of everyone. His body suddenly straightened up. It seemed as if a peerless sharp sword had suddenly been unsheathed. It emitted a startling radiance. The black dragon sword in his hand rushed out like a furious dragon, and fiercely collided with Tu Qianhao's sword. Bang! Gu Duxing's posture was straight. His face was cold and stern. Tu Qianhao screamed. He staggered back with his sword. A footprint appeared on the ground as he took 1 step back. Then, he took 3 steps back. Suddenly, he felt something sweet in his throat. He looked up to the sky, and spat out a mouthful of scarlet blood. Gu Duxing counterattacked with his sword. and Tu Qianhao was immediately seriously injured. The sound of a tsunami from the spectators' stands disappeared in an instant. Everyone looked at this scene in disbelief. They almost couldn't believe their own eyes. How is this possible? Gu Duxing let out a clear shout. He moved forward with his sword, and chopped down. He then said in a low voice, "I'm not injured. Do you understand now?" Tu Qianhao's eyes opened wide in anger. He looked at Gu Duxing. He was so angry that he couldn't speak. At this moment, his heart was filled with boundless hatred for one person, Emo Tianyun. This bastard gave me false information. So, Emo Tianyun and Gu Duxing are in cahoots. Tu Qianhao was so angry that he collapsed when he realized this. Bastard Emo Tianyun. Damned Emo Tianyun. Emo Tianyun is so wicked that he doesn't even have an asshole. I will kill you, You made me suffer so much. You made me suffer so much. Tu Qianhao was extremely indignant. He wanted to curse. But a mouthful of blood gushed out. He opened his mouth to spit it out. Gu Duxing's sword had already come over. Tu Qianhao could only block it head-on. Bang! Tu Qianhao's body staggered back. And he spat out another mouthful of blood. Gu Duxing took a big step forward, and swung his sword again. Gu Duxing was dealing with Tu Qianhao in the same way he had dealt with Tu Qianhao a moment ago. The situation had completely reversed. The eyeballs of the spectators' stands fell to the ground. Fuck. Fuck, fuck, fuck. This situation is unimaginable. Gu Duxing was bound to lose, but he had turned defeat into victory. And Tu Qianhao, who was bound to win, was battered and exhausted. Emo Tianyun asked me to cripple you. Gu Duxing swung his sword again. I also didn't want to. But our Gu clan and the Emo clan had been friends for decades. So, I had no choice but to agree. Tu Qianhao, you can only blame yourself for being too stupid. Tu Qianhao looked at him with grief and indignation. He felt as if his heart was about to explode. He finally spat out mouthfuls of blood. Then he bellowed, I will kill you all. His heart was filled with boundless hatred. And it had almost materialized at this moment. Tu Qianhao would have eaten Emo Tianyun alive if he had been in front of him at this moment. His agility and swordsmanship had become disorganized under extreme anger. And he had exposed his weakness. Gu Duxing let out a long and loud shout. The black dragon sword trembled for a while. Then, he swung his sword 3 times in a row. Tu Qianhao's chest, right shoulder, and face were slashed. Then, a sword light blossomed in front of his chest. Gu Duxing laughed heartily. Then, he raised his foot, and ferociously stamped on Tu Qianhao's chest. He kicked this Grand Duke of the Tu clan, and one of the future 12 influential figures, and sent him flying. Chapter 465. Tu Qianhao was sent flying hundreds of feet away. He felt as if the sky and earth were spinning. He spouted a mouthful of blood, and fell into a semi-conscious state. He only heard Gu Duxing whisper urgently, Emo Tianyun asked me to carve the words "number 1 fool in the world" on your chest if your plan failed. I'm sorry, but I've already done it. Although you won't be able to hear me anymore. However, Tu Qianhao had heard it. He had fainted from anger because he had heard it. The entire place was silent. No one had expected such an outcome. The insufferably arrogant Tu Qianhao had been sent flying by a kick like a broken sack. Gu Duxing leisurely returned in triumph. The people of Tu clan came forward, and carried Tu Qianhao away. They looked at Gu Duxing with a complicated expression in their eyes. Gu Duxing has obviously shown mercy. Tu Qianhao didn't die. His injuries were serious, but they weren't life-threatening. Moreover, they weren't crippled. We owe Gu Duxing a big favor. Du Xiao and Xie Danqiong opened their eyes wide. They stretched their necks forward, and blankly looked at the field. There were only 2 words in their hearts. It's over. We've lost miserably this time. Ao Xie Yun's eyes were also somewhat blank. His eyeballs were showing signs of turning blue. He suddenly patted his thigh, and his complexion turned somewhat sinister. Motherfucker! We've been schemed against! This evil duke had always been graceful and elegant. But he had unexpectedly spouted vulgarities today for the first time. He finally understood why Chu Yang had suddenly thrown down such a big bet. Why did the Dark Bamboo Gang let go of the hidden bid after they had rearranged it? Instead, they had thrown 500 million into the open bid. There's a reasonable reason for all of this now. However, this reason left people speechless and aggrieved. Gu Du-shing wasn't injured. In fact, his injuries weren't as serious as Mo Tianyun had said. He had already recovered. And Tu Qianhao had suffered a big loss because of this. Otherwise, Tu Qianhao would have been able to fight with Gu Du-shing with his strength. But he had lost in a muddle. Moreover, he had lost so miserably that he didn't have the strength to turn the situation around. The three great dukes looked at each other in dismay. They looked at each other's mournful expressions, and felt extremely aggrieved in their hearts. Motherfucker! Which one of us isn't a genius? Who was less scheming? How could he be fooled like this? Stop sighing. That's not a good expression. Ao Shiyun recovered very quickly. He smiled lightly and said, Actually, we should be rejoicing. Luckily, young Master Mo took that 1 billion for himself. Otherwise, if we were to pay another billion, our three families would really be bankrupt. I'm afraid that the three of us would also have to sell ourselves back as slaves to repay our debts. Oh, Du Xiao and Xie Dan Qiong finally reacted. They smiled in a manner that was uglier than crying. Ao Xieyun pursed his lips and said, Look at Grand Duke Mo's expression. How exciting this moment is. Hearing this, the two of them looked over. As expected, they couldn't help but laugh at his misfortune. He saw that Mo Tianyun was lying on his seat with his limbs spread wide open. It seemed as if he was paralyzed. His face was deathly pale, and his lips were trembling. His eyes were filled with shock and indescribable fear. He had already turned into a deathly gray color. Mo Tianyun had personally planned this gamble. He had exhausted all his efforts, racked his brains, and used up all his assets to create such a situation. Xie Dan Qiong and O Du Xiao felt as if they had taken a cold bath on a hot summer day when they imagined Mo Tianyun's current mood. Their entire bodies felt extremely refreshed. Normally, they wouldn't be so happy if they were about to lose several billion. However, they were very proud. This kind of mood was very strange. It was as if they hadn't lost. Instead, they were happy as if they had won. Motherfucker, I lost. I lost. But you, Mo Tianyun, are much more miserable than us. It turns out that I'm not the most miserable one. They felt a lot more comfortable as they thought of this. The fifth match, Gu Du-shing vs. Tu Qianhao. Gu Du-shing wins. The voice of the master of ceremonies reverberated. He was so shocked that his tone changed. It couldn't be helped. It was too unexpected. The entire spectator stands on all sides boiled up with this loud shout. It seemed as if oil had been poured on the fire. Fuck. How is this possible? Didn't they say that Gu Du-shing was injured? Who said that Gu Du-shing won't live long? Motherfucker, how could they not have bet on Jimo's victory if they hadn't said so? I'm so angry. What's going on? He won? Who the fuck released this fake news? I'm going to kill him and bring him home. Didn't they say that he was injured by Mo Tianyun? Motherfucker Mo Tianyun. He cheated me. I bet 200,000, motherfucker Tu Qianhao. He's so awesome every day. Who would have thought that he couldn't beat Gu Du-shing? Fuck, this bastard has been eating for several years more than Gu Du-shing motherfucker. His diarrhea is several times heavier than Gu Du-shing's. He's a fucking piece of trash. He's making me lose money. Mo Tianyun released this fake news? Mo Tianyun released this fake news? Mo Tianyun released this fake news. Mo Tianyun deceived us. Suddenly, someone started to wail. Hundreds of people responded to his call. Countless people started to shed tears. One person suddenly stood up and loudly shouted, "Motherfucker Mo Tian Yun." These words immediately resonated in everyone's hearts. They were the best embodiment of their inner thoughts. Immediately, thousands of people started to shout in unison like a tsunami. "Motherfucker Mo Tian Yun! Motherfucker Mo Tian Yun! Motherfucker Mo Tian Yun!" The cultivations of these people weren't ordinary. So, they simultaneously used their full strength to shout. And their momentum shook the heavens. Mo Tian Yun's prestige had reached the peak of his life at this moment. Chu Yang looked at Gu Du Xing, who had come forward. He blinked his eyes in tacit understanding. "You didn't kill him?" "I didn't kill him." Gu Du Xing's grave and stern face exposed a sneer. "Let him play with Mo Tian Yun first. It won't be too late to kill him later." He winked at Chu Yang as he said this. Chu Yang couldn't help but smile. He suddenly recalled Gu Du Xing's invisible sword energy. He suddenly realized that Gu Du Xing wouldn't let Tu Qian Hao off so kindly. 2 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw. This was equivalent to not having fought a single match. There were still 2 matches left. However, the mood of the spectators' stands had exploded like a barrel of gunpowder. It couldn't be contained any longer. Mo Tianyun's stand was flooded with banana peels, fruit cores, and other things in the blink of an eye. There were also many people who took off their shoes and threw them over. There were also some strange things. Mo Tianyun's stand had opened a grocery store in an instant. There were only things that one couldn't think of. The strangest thing was that there were also a few underwear that had been thrown over. They still carried body temperature and the smell of cosmetics. It was hard to tell where they had come from. The master of ceremonies was somewhat at a loss as to what to do on the stage. It was useless for him to shout now. The match couldn't be carried out. The excited crowd couldn't hear him no matter what he said. Dukyu, who was beside Chu Yang, wrinkled his brows. Then, he suddenly let out a long and loud shout. Wind and thunder surged, and suppressed the shouts of thousands of people in one fell swoop. Dukyu scolded loudly. "What are you shouting for? Do you all want to die? Which one of you will come out and let me see?" "It's Dukyu!" The crowd cried out in a low voice. Everyone's face was still full of indignation. But they didn't dare to jump out and cause trouble. "Dukyu, ah! Fuck! This guy will kill someone if he says one more word. Moreover, Jun Shiju is also here. Fuck! How could everyone forget about this?" Dukyu looked around and said, "People of Dark Bamboo, listen to my orders. Maintain order on the stage. Kill whoever dares to make a ruckus." His voice carried a heavy, murderous aura. Everyone could hear it clearly. "Yes! Master Yu!" All the people of Dark Bamboo shouted together. Everyone was silent out of fear. Chu Yang exclaimed in his heart. The people of Dark Bamboo would maintain order. It was much more effective than Ao Xie Yun and the other righteous people. The master of ceremonies heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he hastily shouted, "Match number 1! Luo Kudi of Luo Clan vs. Li Hongtu of Li Clan." Luo Kudi let out a loud howl, and Xing Shui struggled to stand up. He looked up to the sky and howled, "Oh, it's finally my turn!" At this moment, Gao Xing suddenly laughed out loud. He stood up and said loudly, "GMO! It's 2 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw now. Let's skip Luo Kudi's match. You and I will decide the winner directly. How about it?" He smiled and said, "GMO, you know that a fight between you and me is inevitable. So why don't we settle it here? Show your courage in front of all the heroes of the world, and fight with me." Everyone cursed Gao Xing for being shameless when these words came out. It was obvious that Li Hongtu was no match for this newly promoted king-level master wolf sword. So, Gao Xing was clearly avoiding the important and dwelling on the trivial by mentioning this point. "Gao Sheng, do you want to save your face?" Huyan Aobo stood up in another direction. Her face was full of anger. "Snatch someone's love? How can you say that?" Luo Kudi was also furious. "Gao Xing, what do you mean?" Gao Xing didn't answer. He only looked at GMO. GMO laughed out loud. He stood up and said loudly, Gaoxing, I was just about to teach you a lesson. You're a flashy bastard who occupies the latrine but doesn't take a shit. Huyan Aobo's face turned black. She fiercely looked at GMO. Then, she sat down angrily. Occupying the latrine but doesn't take a shit? What do you mean? GMO, you're dead. Huyan Xiaohui thought angrily in her heart. He doesn't know how to talk. This bastard's mouth must be taught a lesson. Chu Yang looked at Gaoxing and said in a low and hurried voice, GMO, don't forget what I said. GMO nodded. He pursed his lips and said, Don't worry, big brother. I will win. This match isn't optimistic. Dooku looked at GMO, and then looked at Gaoxing. He frowned. With his insight, he could naturally see that although GMO had rushed up quickly, his foundation was not enough. Gaoxing, on the other hand, was fighting steadily and surely. Both of them were second-grade king-level masters. But Gaoxing was at the peak of second-grade king level. And GMO was at second-grade king-level master. There was a big difference between them. I think GMO will win, Chu Zhang said confidently. There may be twists and turns, but he will win in the end. Are you so sure? Dooku suspiciously looked at GMO and Gaoxing. He reevaluated in his heart, and felt that Gaoxing had a bigger chance of winning. He couldn't help but doubt Chu Yang's words. He could see everything clearly at a glance. There wouldn't be any accident. Brother Yu, why don't we make another bet? Let's add some stakes? Chu Yang narrowed his eyes. He looked at Dooku's eyes as if he had found a mountain of gold. Chapter 466. Bet? Dooku tilted his head and looked at Chu Yang. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart. If it was someone else, Dooku would definitely bet without hesitation. But the one in front of him was Chu Yang. Dooku had long been wary of this fellow's elusive methods. His eyes flickered as he thought for a while. Finally, he felt confident. Even if GMO had super-powerful methods or exquisite sword moves like Chu Yang's, or even if he could make Gaoxing panic, the final victory might not be able to surpass his level. He asked, What do you want to bet? The sword spirit hurriedly reminded him in his mind. White crystals! Bet his white crystals! What the tribulation sword needs the most now is not the more high-end purple crystals, but white crystals. Chu Yang smiled and understood. He said, How many white crystals do you have? Dooku's eyes flickered. He said unhappily, Are you looking down on my white crystals? How big is your appetite? You're asking me how many I have? I'll bet as much as you have. Chu Yang was very calm and composed. He was very rich now. In the tribulation space, there were 2 rare herbs, jade snow spirit ginseng, and piles of mysterious jade ice crystals and mysterious young jade. Any one of them was a rare treasure in the world. When it came to gambling, he was not afraid of anyone. I don't have many white crystals. Dooku looked at him with some ridicule. But I only have a few tens of thousands of them. And there's a white crystal mine. You want all of them? What are you betting with? The sword spirit quickly calculated in his mind. His face was shining. Tens of thousands of white crystal mine. This is going to be rich. If the tribulation sword absorbed all of them, it would be able to upgrade by a whole level. A piece of mysterious jade ice crystal and a piece of mysterious yang jade. The sword spirit gave the price. Both of them are the size of a fist. Chu Yang almost fainted. You want to bet Dooku's entire white crystal mine with just a piece of mysterious jade ice crystal and a piece of mysterious yang jade? Don't worry, just say it like that. The sword spirit was full of confidence. Dooku should be practicing the Shadow Sect. Although these 2 pieces of jade are not worth such a high price, he will definitely bet. He thinks this is what he needs the most right now. White crystals are just a burden to someone like him. What are you betting against me? Dooku looked at Chu Yang playfully. He found it somewhat funny in his heart. When did I start using my wealth to smash people? However, Duke Yu felt a sense of accomplishment in his heart when he saw that the little girl was left speechless. This is the most precious thing I have. Chu Yang sighed. If you're satisfied, then let's make a bet. If you're not satisfied, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Chu Yang reached into his bosom and fished it out. Then, he hung his head dejectedly and said, Only these 2 pieces are all of my assets. Duke Yu was smiling smugly when he saw the things that Chu Yang took out. His mouth suddenly opened wide, and his eyes bulged out. In Chu Yang's palm, there were 2 fist-sized pieces of jade stacked together. The top piece emitted a faint chill, while the bottom piece emitted a faint warmth. One hot, one cold, one yin, one yang. It seemed as if an absolutely balanced cycle had been formed in Chu Yang's hands. A misty white and warm moisture rose up from Chu Yang's palm. It didn't disperse, and just floated there. Mysterious jade ice crystal. Mysterious yang jade. Duke Yu's eyes were fixed. His Adam's apple moved up and down as if he was swallowing something. Is it okay? Chu Yang asked somewhat nervously. I know it's a little too little. I can't do anything if you don't want to make a bet. It's a little too little. These are a lot, Duke Yu said emotionlessly. Let's make a bet. How can I not make a bet? I'll make a bet. A real man keeps his word. I won't regret a promise even if I die 100 times. Then let's make a bet, Chu Yang asked with certainty. Let's make a bet. Duke Yu anxiously snatched the mysterious jade ice crystal and mysterious yang jade. He fondled them lovingly and said, I'll take care of the gambling capital. I'll be the notary. You don't have to worry, right? Haha, you don't have to worry. Chu Yang was speechless. You're participating in the bet. You're the party involved. You're the notary? Is there such a saying in the world? Don't worry. Duke Yu patted his shoulder and said, I won't let you make a loss. If you lose, these things will be mine. Then I'll compensate you with 1,000 white crystals. If you win, I'll exchange all my white crystals with you. How about it? Chu Yang was furious. This guy's words were too shameless. What do you mean by if I win? I'll bet all your white crystals. Chu Yang flew into a rage. Hey, it's meaningless if you're anxious, isn't it? Duke Yu said shamelessly. You see, these 2 pieces of jade are already in my hands. You can't do anything even if I run away with them, right? But my character is good. Not only did I not run away, I even stayed behind to gamble with you. Moreover, I'll compensate you if I win the bet. I won't go back on my word if I lose the bet. You should be grateful to me. There are many people who kill and rob in these 3 days. How many of them talk about integrity like me? Duke Yu said. Chu Yang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Fine, you'll take them away if you win the bet. You'll still take them away if you lose the bet. Talk about integrity? Brother, if you go into business, you'll definitely be as rich as a country. Fine, but I have a request. Chu Yang finally revealed his foxtail. Since you've taken advantage of me, I'll naturally have my own request. If you lose, I'll go to your treasury and personally inspect the goods. In addition, I'll also take away the purple crystal core that you owe me in the lower 3 heavens. Duke Yu was displeased. Do you think I'll go back on my word? Chu Yang thought, you still have the face to say this? What you're doing right now is going back on your word from start to finish. What do you think? Chu Yang sneered. Duke Yu reached out and put his arm around his shoulder. As if they were good brothers, he said. Fine, it's settled then. It's a deal then. Hee, then no matter who wins or loses, these 2 pieces of jade will be mine. This Duke will not decline this responsibility. Haha, who asked me to be the most qualified in the lower 3 heavens? Don't you think so? Chu Yang turned his face away and spat. He really had nothing to say. Mo Qingwu, who had been listening to their conversation in his arms, raised her head and looked at Duke Yu angrily. You're really too bad. You actually cheated my brother Chu Yang's things. In my opinion, you should return these 2 pieces of jade to brother Chu Yang. Then, no matter who wins or loses, you should give all the things in your treasury to Brother Chu Yang. Dooku glared at this little girl. Finally, he spread his hands helplessly and said, I'm a little unreasonable. But I'm not as unreasonable as you, you're the unreasonable one. Mo Qingwu said fiercely. Fine, I'm unreasonable, Dooku dejectedly admitted. Then, he turned around and went to sit with Gu Duxing, far away from this troublesome place. From afar, he could still hear the little girl pouting and muttering in dissatisfaction. This is too unreasonable. Dooku staggered and almost fell to the ground. In Chu Yang's mind, the sword spirit was very happy. He said, You'll be rich as long as you win this round. What do you mean? Chu Yang asked in puzzlement. There are so many white crystals. The essence contained in them can allow the tribulation sword to break away from the level of ordinary metals like gold, silver, copper, and iron. It can be upgraded to a spirit sword. Once it becomes a spirit sword, you can treat Mo Qingwu's injuries. The sword spirit tempted. I can treat her injuries now. Chu Yang rolled his eyes. Doesn't this require an extremely safe space? Nonsense! If you treat her injuries now, of course, you can heal her 3 meridians. But the greatest effect of the heavy pill will be wasted. The sword spirit rolled his eyes. But after upgrading to a spirit sword, I can use the heavy pill to connect her 3 meridians. Then, I can seal the medicinal efficacy in her body. As she progresses level by level, it will gradually increase. Then, when she reaches the Emperor level, the medicinal efficacy in her body will completely explode, and she will rush to the Monarch level in one fell swoop. This is the true power of the heavy pill. Moreover, as long as you do this, not only will her cultivation speed far surpass that of any so-called genius, but it will also play a life-saving role in critical moments. The sword spirit snorted and said, That's all. You decide. If you insist on treating her injuries at this time, I won't stop you. Chu Yang was overjoyed. He said, What else is there to say? Of course, I have to get the white crystals first. Anyway, I will rely on Dooku to get the white crystals after the fight. It won't take much effort. Haha. The sword spirit looked at him in disdain. Then, he sank into his consciousness and didn't speak. Ji Mo's appearance was somewhat low-key. He walked down step by step. He secretly adjusted his strength with every step he took. He knew that the gap between him and Gao Xing wasn't small. Therefore, he didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless. He tried hard to control his temper. He didn't want to waste any bit of his strength outside of the fight. Flying down was naturally very glorious. But GMO didn't want to waste this little bit of strength. After all, this was related to his marriage. Who would his wife belong to? Gao Xing didn't have any psychological pressure whether he won or lost. But he couldn't do the same for himself. Gao Xing had been waiting on the field for a while. But GMO was still walking down at a moderate pace. He couldn't help but say angrily, Can you be faster? GMO rolled his eyes. What does it matter to you whether I'm fast or slow? Are you that anxious to get beaten up? He was cautious in his heart. But he didn't want to suffer a loss with his mouth. He remembered Big Brother Chu's teachings in his heart, You must be calm. Don't be anxious. Of course, it would be more ideal if you could scold Gao Xing until he became anxious. Go ahead. I believe in your eloquence. Gao Xing sneered and said, GMO, are you afraid? What's wrong? You have the guts to do it, but you don't have the guts to bear the consequences? Ha ha, Gao Xing, this sentence of yours is ridiculous. What do you mean by having the guts but not the guts to bear the consequences? GMO let out a long laugh. Do you think that such a big occasion would have happened if I hadn't agreed? This sentence was true. Gao Xing had proposed a challenge. But there wouldn't have been this grand occasion if GMO hadn't agreed. GMO said in a loud voice, I, GMO, have come at least. I, GMO, have come at you. At least. I, GMO, dare to take responsibility. I dare to love. I dare to fight for my woman. At least. I, GMO, am not like some people who run away from an engagement. If you don't want to, then just say that you don't want to, right? No one is forcing you. But you're still dragging it out. You won't cancel the engagement. Why? GMO roared. You've taken a fancy to the Huyen clan's status and wealth. Do you think that the heroes of the world are stupid? That they can't see your intentions? Everyone. Don't you think so? GMO raised his voice and roared. Thousands of people responded in unison. Yes. GMO became even more complacent. He waved his hand in all directions in a very graceful manner. He assumed the role of a leader. Then, he continued to speak eloquently. Gaoxing, you covet strength and covet wealth. This is human nature. Even if you say it out loud, you'll only say that your character isn't good. But what you shouldn't do the most is to ruthlessly delay a woman's youth while coveting everything. How much is a woman's youth? You're hogging it like this. But you don't have any follow-up. Are you still human? Gaoxing's lips trembled with anger. He pointed his finger at GMO. You're talking nonsense. I'm Gaoxing. How can I be that kind of person? You are. GMO bellowed condescendingly. He saw that Gaoxing still wanted to refute him. So, he continued to shout. You are. Tens of thousands of people roared with laughter. Then, thousands of people joined in the fun, and shouted. You are. Huyen Aoba stood in a daze in the Huyen clan's camp. She looked at GMO from afar. She suddenly felt sad and moved in her heart. GMO raised his hand in a dignified manner. Everyone, this brother hasn't finished speaking. Ha ha ha. Second Master G, please speak. Everyone burst into laughter. But they didn't make any noise. I, GMO, have spared no effort. I have traveled thousands of miles. I have traveled through the stars and the moon. I have come here to participate in this battle for the sake of my beloved daughter. Why? GMO looked up and roared. It's because of the true feelings in my heart. A wood dog ant. Tens of thousands of people shouted at the same time. For the true feelings in my heart. A wood dog ant. Then, someone quietly asked the person beside him. Brother, this dog ant, what is she? That person was waving his arms and shouting. But he replied in a bad mood. How would I know what she is? You go and ask Second Master G. Then, he continued to wave his arms and roar. For the true feelings in my heart. A wood dog ant. GMO walked down a few steps in high spirits. Then, he waved his arms and shouted. I will rescue my beloved daughter from the evil young master's hands. I will give her happiness. I will give her a future. I won't let some evil people with ulterior motives succeed in their schemes. A dog ant. Tens of thousands of people shouted in unison. Second Master G is mighty. A dog ant. GMO was in high spirits. He waved his arms. His entire face was impassioned. He suddenly felt his blood boiling. He raised his hand towards the sky and roared. Heaven! Give me strength. Let me defeat evil. Let me save her. Protect her. Accompany her. Give her happiness. Then, he suddenly roared in an earth-shattering manner. Make her my wife. Oh, everyone was boiling over. The entire audience was boiling over. Who had ever seen such a bold courtship in this day and age? Huyen Aoba looked at GMO with boundless tenderness in her eyes. Many womenfolk of the Huyen clan had also arrived behind her. They were hugging their shoulders, and saying that this was too corny. But their eyes were flashing with deep envy. Gaoxing was fuming with anger at this moment. His body trembled, and he almost spouted a mouthful of blood. Fuck! GMO, have you come here to fight? Or to sing? Chapter 467. GMO walked down from the top. Halfway down, he had already stirred up the crowd's emotions. At first, only the people from the Gu, Luo, Dong, and Ji clans and those who had bet on GMO were cheering. But later on, the entire crowd was cheering. Even those who had bet on Gao Xing were cheering. Because Ji Mo's words had struck a chord in everyone's hearts. It's understandable for you to pursue power and wealth. But you can't force a girl you don't even like to get all these for power and wealth. Not only are you letting down the two great clans and that girl, you're also letting down yourself. Then what right do you have to fight for all these? You actually want to duel with someone because of this? I bet on you because I want to win money, but this doesn't mean that I don't despise your character. I'll scold you, I'll boo you, but as long as you win, I'll still take the money. I'll praise you, I'll support you, but if you lose, I'll still compensate you. What's wrong with that? Therefore, Second Master Ji's prestige grew. As he walked down, he waved his hand gracefully. His face was radiant, and he was so moved that his buttocks were unconsciously swaying. Hence, he started to sing this song, swaying his hips, and even walking with his feet splayed outwards. He was as steady as a mountain as he walked down the stairs. We must win! Second Master Ji raised his arms and shouted. We must win! The crowd shouted in unison. We must defend our true love! Second Master Ji took 2 steps forward and continued to shout in a majestic manner. Defend our true love! The crowd shouted together. We must defeat the devil! Second Master Ji continued to work hard. Defeat the devil! The crowd's emotions grew more and more excited. Oh! Second Master Ji waved his arms. His lips curled up, and he let out a standard wolf howl. Oh! The crowd howled together. Dog ant! Second Master Ji was so excited that he couldn't tell north from south. He swayed his buttocks and jumped. Dog ant! The crowd was boiling with excitement. Below, Gao Xing was so angry that his hands and feet were cold. His face was sallow, and his lips were trembling. He looked at the incomparably cool GMO with hatred. With a cracking sound, one of his teeth was crushed. If I can't kill you, I'll. Gao Xing thought frantically. On the spectator stand, Chu Yang looked at Duke Yu. Are you still sure that Gao Xing will win? Duke Yu let out a long sigh. I can't be sure. Now that GMO was in the limelight, Gao Xing was so angry that he became impatient. He will not be able to maintain his icy state of mind during the battle, and the outcome will be hard to predict. Chu Yang chuckled mischievously. He pointed at the boiling crowd and said, These are all forces. They are also important conditions for the decisive battle. This saying the more the merrier isn't just for show. Duke Wei said, There's nothing wrong with using such methods. However, it's still somewhat despicable. Chu Yang sneered. This is a decisive battle. He had to make use of every possible factor to attack the enemy. Was that enough? It was far from enough. Just wait and see. GMO finally walked down from the grandstand. Then, he arrogantly stepped onto the field. He walked for a full hour on this path. This made Gao Xing, who was waiting below, miserable beyond words. When Gao Xing saw GMO come down, he immediately became angry. 3,000 flames of anger rushed into his heart. GMO, prepare to die. He rushed out after he finished speaking. Wait! GMO roared. He stretched out his hand and gestured for him to stop. Gao Xing stopped and asked angrily, What are you doing? Why haven't you said start? GMO said to the Master of Ceremonies with dissatisfaction. Can't you see that young Master Gao can't wait to be beaten up? Gao Xing's whole body suddenly trembled. Fine, GMO, I will let you see who is the one who can't wait to be beaten up. The Master of Ceremonies had a strange look on his face. He finally raised his hand. The battle begins. The Master of Ceremonies hadn't even finished speaking when Gao Xing rushed over impatiently. He rushed in front of GMO, and his fists blew the hair on GMO's forehead into a mess. Wait! GMO shouted like a thunderbolt. He stared at Gao Xing and stood motionless. Gao Xing was so angry that he had no choice but to stop. He gritted his teeth and said in anger, What do you want to do again? Ah? Who would have thought that GMO would suddenly throw a punch at Gao Xing's face? Gao Xing's nose started to bleed crazily, and his face started to bleed. Gao Xing felt a sharp pain, and his tear glands were affected. He could not open his eyes, and tears flowed out of his eyes. GMO laughed. I said, wait. I need to make the first move. He did not show any mercy and continued to punch Gao Xing 3 times, followed by 2 kicks. He took advantage of the opportunity when Gao Xing was covering his face with his hands. Gao Xing was sent flying like a sandbag. The noisy venue suddenly became silent. Everyone saw this scene, and their heads were in a knot. They could not react. GMO caught up with Gao Xing at lightning speed. He then kicked Gao Xing's body in an awe-inspiring manner. Then, he proudly shouted, "Humph! You asterisk shoal! The master of ceremonies had said start, and you actually listened to me when I asked you to wait? Ah? Then why didn't you die when I asked you to? You asterisk shoal!" Gao Xing rolled and crawled away. He was battered and exhausted. His whole body was in unbearable pain. He was so angry that his liver hurt. However, the gamblers in the stands finally understood. They started to curse. GMO, you are so shameless. You sneak attacked. Then, someone retorted, bullshit. What's a sneak attack? This is a duel. The master of ceremonies had said that the duel would start. Who can be blamed for Gao Xing not being on guard? I can only say that he's asterisk shoal. There's nothing else to say. Would you be an accountant if you were in my place? Absolutely not. What this guy said was pure bullshit. In such a situation, if one was caught off guard, there was an 80% chance that someone would fall for it. However, these words had successfully instigated a rebellion. Gao Xing, are you stupid? The duel has started. Are you still dreaming? Motherfucker, GMO asked you to stop, and you stopped? Why are you so obedient? He's your opponent, not your father. I owe my silver. Gao Xing was so angry that blood rushed to his head. He quickly jumped up and wiped his face. His handsome face was covered with blood. He looked ferocious and terrifying. He roared and crazily rushed over. Hold on! GMO shouted loudly. However, Gao Xing didn't pay attention to him. He roared and rushed forward. However, he saw a sword-like flash in front of his eyes. He felt pain on his body, and hastily retreated. He felt a piercing pain. He lowered his head to look, and couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. There was a sword mark on his chest. His flesh had been cut open, and his bones could almost be seen. You are despicable. Gao Xing was so angry that he became muddle-headed. This bastard had actually pulled out his sword without making a sound. I was so angry that I didn't notice when he pulled out his sword. I said wait because I wanted to remind you, you haven't pulled out your sword yet. GMO innocently shrugged his shoulders. Fuck, I was being kind. Everyone, have you seen me? I kindly reminded him to pull out his sword. Who in the 3 heavens doesn't know that I, GMO, use a sword? He scolded me because of this. Everyone, you can't be a good person. You have a good heart. But you will be treated as a donkey's liver and lungs. Gao Xing roared and spat out a mouthful of blood. GMO, you didn't make a sound when you pulled out your sword. It was clearly a deliberate sneak attack. The gamblers in the stands faintly felt that something was wrong. So, they immediately changed sides. Yes, your sword didn't make a sound. It was clearly a premeditated sneak attack. Everyone, I'm being wrongly accused. GMO turned around to let Gao Xing see. You see, the entire 3 heavens knows that I use a sheathless sword. Where did I get a sheath? Thousands of people shouted at the same time. Yes, Second Master Ji's sword doesn't have a sheath. These thousands of people were clearly supporting him. However, the crowd didn't understand. So, they turned to blame Gao Xing. You motherfucker, your opponent's sword doesn't have a sheath. You didn't know? You even got injured because of this. Gao Xing was so angry that his vision turned black. When did GMO use a sheathless sword? How come I didn't know? This is clearly a lie. But GMO had already rushed over energetically. Gao Xing! Don't say that I bullied you in front of all the heroes in the world. Come, let's have a fair fight. I won't take advantage of you. His words were so righteous that it inspired reverence. It attracted a round of applause. Gao Xing's stomach twitched. He was so angry that he almost spat out another mouthful of blood. You first broke my nose and caused my vision to blur. Then, you took the opportunity to beat me up. Then, you almost crippled my leg with a sneak attack. You made me so angry that I spat out blood. Now you want to have a fair fight with me? You even said that you won't take advantage of me? How can you take advantage of me? Gao Xing was so angry that the muscles on his face were twitching. He suppressed his anger and pulled out his sword. He couldn't wait to chop GMO into meat paste. GMO shouted as he dodged. Good! Good sword! So despicable! Damn despicable, 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 despicable! He jumped around like a nimble monkey. Gao Xing shouted and increased the speed of his sword. He attacked GMO like a storm. GMO suddenly stopped talking. He seemed to be having a hard time fighting. In fact, he was having a hard time. Gao Xing's cultivation was a notch higher than his. Even though he was in a state of frenzy, he was still very powerful. GMO was silent, and Gao Xing was proud of himself. You are only good with your mouth. How can you be my opponent when we fight? They fought in silence for a long time. GMO was defending most of the time, while Gao Xing attacked. GMO was about to be forced into a desperate situation. Gao Xing's sword net had already formed a dense net. GMO suddenly screamed miserably. Ah! This scream was so sudden that the spectators were shocked. Their scalps went numb, and they felt a chill down their spines. Even Gao Xing was puzzled. Where did he get cut? He looked over. His sword slowed down, and GMO used his sword to counterattack like a storm. As he attacked, he muttered, "Fuck, I almost got cut." Chapter 468. Gao Xing was furious. Knowing that he had fallen into a trap, he didn't say a word and attacked fiercely with his sword. GMO's toes lightly touched the ground, and his body quickly retreated backwards. Gao Xing madly chased after him. GMO suddenly used all the strength in his body to fly backwards, and widen the distance between them. Suddenly, he opened his eyes wide and looked behind Gao Xing. Then, he shouted with grief and indignation on his face. "Gao Chang! Don't tell me you want to bully me with numbers? This is in front of all the heroes of the world." Gao Xing was furious. He turned his head and shouted, "Who told you to come?" But he didn't find anyone behind him. Following that, the sharp sound of a golden blade slicing through the air behind him made him realize that he had been tricked. It was already too late for him to turn around, so he swung his sword backwards with all his might. At the same time, he twisted his body and flew backwards while maintaining a weird posture. Two clang sounds were heard. Gao Xing felt a strong force on his buttocks. GMO had ferociously kicked his buttocks, and he was sent flying in the air. Gao Xing spat out blood in midair, not because he was beaten, but because he was angry. The pain in his body was far inferior to the grievance in his heart. GMO didn't wait for him to get up. Instead, he flew over with his sword in his hand. He shouted loudly, "Gao Xing! Stand up! Let's have a fair fight!" Gao Xing turned over and stood up. He wanted to vomit blood in his heart. She had enough time to stand up, but when he shouted, it seemed like he was deliberately leaving time for her to stand up. However, by the time he stood up, GMO had already arrived in the air with a sword light. Gao Xing stood on the ground. This time, it was his turn to defend. GMO's sword light was like a tiger's. It carried a strong impact force. He didn't let his opponent off. His attacks were getting more and more intense. Gao Xing was already suffering from internal and external troubles. He was so sullen that he wanted to die. Now that he was being suppressed and beaten, his heart felt even more uncomfortable. They only defended frantically, trying their best to find any opportunity to counterattack. However, Jimo's attacks were like the Yangtze River. They were unceasingly flowing. Gao Xing had a thorough understanding of the Ji clan's sword techniques before the decisive battle. But he discovered that Jimo's sword techniques were often mixed with some strange sword techniques this time. Moreover, he had never seen these sword moves before, yet they were extraordinarily powerful. Every move he made left him in a sorry state. Dang 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 sounds kept ringing out. Gao Xing continuously retreated step by step. Jimo's figure continuously chased after him in the air. His imposing manner was very aggressive. Finally, his breath was exhausted. Gao Xing sensed that the opponent's offensive was about to come to an end. So, he gathered his strength and prepared to counterattack. However, he saw GMO somersaulting backwards and flying far away. He shouted, "Don't say that I didn't give you fairness. Now, it's your turn to attack me." Gao Xing, who was about to attack, suddenly saw stars in front of his eyes. His body swayed a few times. How shameless! If you didn't tell me, do you think I wouldn't know how to attack? Someone in the stand shouted loudly. Second Master Ji! This is a decisive battle, Second Master Ji. Don't give him a chance to catch his breath. You're so benevolent and righteous, but they won't appreciate it. Hurry up and attack, Second Master Ji. This guy was the one who had been forced to bet against GMO by Luo Kudi's sword. He couldn't help but shout when he saw that victory was in sight. His face was full of resentment. At such a crucial moment, he actually let his opponent attack? Ayaya, my Second Master Ji, he is your opponent in the final battle. Why are you still so particular about your demeanor? This guy couldn't wait to rush down and fight on behalf of GMO. My silver! My silver is about to fall into my hands. He couldn't imagine that GMO looked confident and at ease. But he didn't have the strength to attack. If he continued to attack, he would have been counterattacked by his opponent. And that would have been disastrous. Second Master Ji is so benevolent and righteous. Many people praised him. Especially when he was compared to Gao Xing, Second Master Ji appeared even more heroic and straightforward. Gao Xing had already suffered internal injuries. Moreover, he had been angered to the point of muddle-headedness. Then, he had been hit repeatedly. He had suffered a lot of punches and kicks. So, his internal organs had been severely shaken. The sword wound on his thigh was still bleeding. He heard that such a despicable person had used such a shameless method, and had won the reputation of being benevolent and righteous. So, he couldn't help but roar. You're talking nonsense! You're all talking nonsense! Wah! He couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood as soon as these words came out of his mouth. His vision became blurry as he spat out this mouthful of blood. His body was on the verge of collapse. Gao Xing lost. Dookie looked at the field and pondered. He had seen Jimo's method clearly. But he didn't laugh. Instead, he was pondering. This method is very powerful. Without shedding a drop of blood. Dookie looked at Chuyang. It's your doing, right? Chuyang laughed and said. Half of it. Gao Xing can be considered a rising star. His composure can be considered good. But he was angered to the point of insanity. If it had been someone else, they would have died from anger before they could even make a move. Dookie sighed. It's not a brilliant plan. But it's extremely effective. Chuyang smiled and said, Of course, the most important factor is GMO himself. Dookie was startled. Then he laughed. Yes, yes. This plan would have been useless against GMO if he wasn't so thick-skinned. And Mo Qingwu giggled. Brother Jimo's skin has always been the thickest. Dookie's face turned serious as he said, You're wrong. Your brother Chu Yang's skin is 100 times thicker than your brother Jimo's. 1,000 times. And Mo Qingwu pouted unhappily. She looked at Dookie and snorted. But you still snatched my brother Chu Yang's things. Your skin is 1,000 times thicker than brother Chu Yang's. No, it's 10,000 times thicker. Dukyu pretended not to hear. He glared at the scene and ignored her. His face didn't change at all. He was indeed thick-skinned. On the scene, Gao Xing was gasping for breath. He felt that the world was spinning. He couldn't suppress his internal injuries any longer. He heard GMO shout from the opposite side. Are you coming or not? Are you coming or not? I'm giving you a chance. I'll count to 3. If you don't come, I'll go over. 1, 2, 3. I'm going over. I'm going over to hit you. I'm really going over to hit you. Fuck, make a sound. Do you really want me to go over? Gao Xing screamed and spat out a mouthful of blood. He didn't wait for GMO to really come over. Then, he fainted. His body went soft, and he fell to the ground with a schwa sound. He was unconscious. GMO was startled. He looked at young Master Gao, who had fallen to the ground. He thought, is this a trick? Therefore, he continued to shout. Get up! Get up! Second Master Ji is straightforward and upright. He is benevolent and righteous. He has noble character and unquestionable integrity. He has never attacked an enemy who has fallen to the ground. Get up! Get up! However, Gao Xing couldn't stand up no matter how much he shouted. Moreover, he couldn't hear him. Fortunately, he couldn't hear him. Otherwise, he would have fainted again. Did he really faint? GMO cautiously approached him and kicked him with the tip of his foot. But Gao Xing didn't respond. Fuck, he really fainted? He really fainted? He really fainted. Fuck. GMO kicked him a few times. But he didn't get any response. So, he was finally sure that he had fainted. He couldn't help but touch his head. He was puzzled. I didn't hit you much. How did you faint? He stood there and pondered for a while. Then, he turned his head and said to the Master of Ceremonies, I seem to have won, right? Master of Ceremonies. Does this count as my win? GMO was somewhat uncertain. He didn't fight back when I hit him? You won. The Master of Ceremonies was speechless as he replied. Well, you've also won here. Then, why don't you quickly announce that I've won? GMO glared at him and said, You're the Master of Ceremonies. But you're somewhat slow. Why are you still standing there and dreaming? The Master of Ceremonies was so angry that he almost fainted. He hastily retreated a few steps. He calmed down and adjusted his breathing. Then he shouted, The final battle. GMO wins. He didn't need to say it. Everyone knew it. That was because the audience was already in chaos. The sky had been turned upside down. Many people were wailing and crying. The money that they had accumulated through years of hard work had gone down the drain. This group of people had basically bet all their assets. Even if they still had pocket money on hand, they didn't have much left. Gao Xing's defeat was equivalent to these people losing their entire fortune. Many people started to curse. He's a piece of trash. He's so much older than his opponent. And he's a level higher than him. But he's not his opponent. Goddamn Gao Xing. He's making us lose money. These people had bet most of their fortune. But they still had some savings. But they were extremely angry in their hearts. Many people were crazily laughing. He won. He won. Fuck. He won. I didn't expect. These people had bet on GMO. Some people were remorseful. Motherfucker. I would have bet more if I had known this earlier. I would have bet even with a high interest rate. I would have bet as much as I could. Motherfucker. These people were greedy and insatiable. The happiest person was obviously that fat man who had been forced by Luo Kudi to bet on GMO. He was dancing with joy at this moment. In fact, he didn't even know what his surname was. This is a great help. It's no wonder that fortune teller said that my life is good. I had already lost money. But someone pointed a sword at me. And I won. What is this if not good life? Of course, the most miserable person was undoubtedly young Master Mo Tianyun. Young Master Mo had also fainted the moment Gao Xing had fainted. He hadn't woken up yet. Perhaps he would rather not wake up. After all, he would have had to face billions of debts if he woke up. What about the people of Gao clan? GMO finally remembered something important. Take out the marriage contract. Tear it up. Your marriage contract doesn't exist from now on. Only our love will exist. Everyone felt like vomiting. Gao Meng of Gao clan took out the marriage contract and handed it over to GMO in front of everyone. Then, he led his men to carry Gao Xing out. Gao Xing had already woken up. But he was so angry that his heart hurt. Moreover, he was extremely ashamed. So, he pretended to be unconscious as he was carried out. GMO tore the marriage contract to shreds. He raised his hands, and they turned into white butterflies. He then jumped up with a sound. I won. I won. Audiobook, you're my wife. Audiobook. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.